Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Monday, August 30th, 2021 Town of Newcastle work session. If I could please have a motion from someone.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are going to jump into the first issue, which is the mask mandate. Rob, if you want to lead us off, please.
This evening, we're going to have a discussion about reinstating, the mask mandate.
Is that on? Is it on?
No.
It is on?
Carrie, am I on?
You need to talk a little
Yeah,
louder.
maybe bring it a little closer.
You're next to me.
All right, perfect.
Okay. Good evening. First topic is the mask mandate discussion. In light of the recent uptick in COVID cases, the town board is going to consider reinstating the mask mandate for the town.
Right, and when we say reinstating the mask mandate, not necessarily the same exact mandate, but considering
Right.
some regulations. So Ed, maybe you want to sort of address the regulations that we've considering and.
Right, so this is a continuation of a discussion that you started at your last work session. What we've done since then is draft an amendment to the existing local law that was adopted by the town board last summer. The local law that you adopted last summer was very much intended to deal with the situation on the ground at that time. And if you remember, it basically dealt with public property and private property, and with respect to the mask mandate, and that was what was advisable then. And there was other content from the local law that, again, was very tailored to what was happening in July of 2020. Well, the idea is to bring that forward, to have an amendment to the local law that would essentially update it, bring it in line with what we know today about best practices with respect to mask mandates. And the big difference, a big difference between what we've drafted for you to consider and the one that's on the books now is the ability of the supervisor to essentially tailor the extent of the mask mandate based on the situation that you're actually faced with. So, for example, it may not be advisable to have a mask requirement with respect to outdoor activity like you have on the books now and like you had last summer. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that would never be needed again. But if it was, the amended local law would give the supervisor the ability to bring that back. And if it's not necessary, you could just bring back a mask mandate with respect to indoor activity. So that was the approach that we took with respect to the redraft. It's a red line. It might be a little bit hard to follow, but we wanted to show you the before and the after. And if the board was inclined to go ahead, schedule a public hearing, and actually implement something, would probably be a repeal and replace that, because there's a lot of changes that are being made to the old law. But I just wanted the board to see how it was changing, and that's why you have a red one in the packet.
Thanks, Ed. I know, there were a couple of things that made this timely. Certainly one is, the reemergence of cases locally, the emergence of a variant that is more robust in infecting, evidence that vaccinated people can be infected, even in town hall, that vaccinated people can transmit to others, and that eligibility for vaccination is not universal at the moment. And we are still looking at about 30% of the regional population that is not vaccinated. The number may be even lower than that. We'll know when all of these numbers are adjusted for census updates. And we also live in a community where we have middle school children who flood our streets and stores after school, who are coming back to school, who will be largely unvaccinated in those spaces. I was relieved to see the school district require masking for indoors, but not require masks for outdoors. So that was also nice because we can have practices that are consistent with what the families are experiencing in school as well. And at the same time, try and adopt a legislation that is responsive to the needs of our small businesses in town. This is where we start to have some disconnect with the science around transmission and accommodations that support small business. But at this stage, I think that's necessary and the balance that I'm happy that we think we have the opportunity to keep at the moment. And I think the two carve-outs or exceptions pertinent to that are that masks would not be required in a restaurant while drinking and eating. And that, and you can clarify this for me because we did talk about this a little bit offline, was if we can have an exception for fitness businesses while exercising. I did get some feedback mixed feedback actually, from different fitness businesses in the area around this topic. Some saying we'll do whatever the town legislation says, and others saying that having to wear masks during exercise would have a significant negative impact on their business, particularly if other regional towns didn't have a similar mandate because they believed that some of their customers would go elsewhere to avoid having to wear a mask while they exercised. So, we, I think are in a moment where we have some flexibility to try and solve for as much as we can, but maintain the portability to make it more stringent if the need arises. I can also speak to a couple questions that have come up in communication that we've gotten to the town since we first brought this up. I'd say in terms of emails to the town board, there certainly have been arguments both for and against the appeals for the mask mandate or the return of the mask mandate largely outnumber those against. I'd say it's roughly about 10-1. Some of the questions have been, how do we know when to enact it, and then how do we know when to withdraw it? And those are both great questions. If it were up to me, I would enact it now, today. We have seen a bit of a flattening in the case numbers in the county and in Newcastle over the last week. I suspect that is a consequence of people being on vacation. In fact, as of today, the cases have jumped from 20 to 25 just from Friday to today. So, so I'll be continuing to keep a close eye on what happens there. But for all the reasons that I outlined before, I think that this is a reasonable measure for us to be taking to protect the community and also not have to put our business owners in the position of being public health policy determiners. And then in terms of my thoughts anyway on when to withdraw, CDC is recommending masks for vaccinated and unvaccinated people indoors in regions where transmission is substantial or high, and Westchester County is high. So the CDC updates those ratings of regions in terms of rates of transmission. And I would suggest that, at a point at which Westchester County sustains a low level of transmission would be appropriate timing to withdraw mask legislation. So those are some of my thoughts on the topic. Certainly very curious to see what my fellow board members think, continuing to solicit input from the community and have done outreach specifically to restaurant owners and fitness business owners. Still awaiting some of that feedback and have some phone calls actually scheduled to continue those conversations that could provide some further insight.
I'll be much more brief. I support it, which is hard for me to do, but I absolutely support it. It's not an all or nothing approach, which I like. Number one. And number two, we've learned here right at home that you can be reinfected, even if you're vaccinated. And additionally, as I mentioned last week in my supervisor's report, my son, who's 8, went and volunteered, knowing what he was doing to get the COVID-19 vaccination as a trial for someone under 12. And when I was speaking with the physician there who was running it, she said that, up at Yale, she said that they had multiple, and I don't know if that was 2 or 3 or what it was, children in the ICU, so that they are susceptible. So in light of the fact that we have children who are going back to school and are going to be immersed with other kids, I think it's a smart and practical thing to do, and I'm in support. Thank you.
So I guess I'll go. I think that nobody sitting on this dais is a medical professional. And that is why I'm inclined, and I know this is what, I see 2 members of our current school board here. They, I know, are inclined to follow the Department of Health guidelines, which is why they have mandated masks in school and not outside, following the Department of Health guidelines. And I think that nobody up here is skilled enough or has the right background to be able to determine when it should be lifted. And I think we should be following Department of Health guidelines from the state. When we initially put in our state of emergency, it was in response to what the state had promulgated, and the Department of Health had promulgated. I don't know that I'm willing to do something that they have not yet promulgated, because I don't know that any of us on this dais have the skills necessary to determine that. I will say that I'm not in favor of exempting gyms if we're going to institute this, because it's all or nothing. You don't get to please some people and not please others. Certainly, gyms are a place where people are sweating, huffing and puffing. It's probably breathing a lot heavier than they are inside. And I think that probably the active transmission there would be even greater than it would be sitting far apart from each other inside. So I would not be in favor of that. I know it's probably not something, politically that people want to hear, but I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm not going to bow to that. And I think that certainly then you're going to have store owners and other people say, well, how come you're exempting them and you're not exempting us? And I think me in a jewelry store is less likely to get it than me standing next to someone on a treadmill in a gym. So I would not be in favor, if we did this, of exempting that. But I do feel that we should be following Department of Health guidelines, which is what our school board does, and that's why they've been so successful, and they haven't received pushback because they're doing what is appropriately required of them by those who actually have the degrees to determine that.
So Lisa, just to be clear, are you in favor of a mask mandate or not?
I'm in favor of following Department of Health guidelines.
Have you reviewed them?
Yes, I have.
And how do they apply here?
I don't need to answer your questions. I'm in favor, though, of talking to a local law, of having a public hearing about it. But I don't think it's 10 to 1. I actually have heard from a lot of people not in favor of it, some in favor of it. I think it's probably evenly split. I certainly think everyone wanted them within the schools, and I applaud the schools for following those Department of Health guidelines and doing that, while not implementing them outdoors, because that hasn't been required, and I know it's been difficult for kids to run and exercise. So I'm definitely in favor of following those guidelines.
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ed, the law would allow it to be tailored as we deem appropriate, whatever it may be. So it's not mandating that we do outside for everybody, for example. We can choose or not to choose that. We can make those decisions as we move through the process and see how things evolve.
That's the way it was drafted.
Yeah. So I'm in favor of having a public hearing to talk about it. I want to hear from everybody. Definitely, I said that last time too, but if we're going to pick and choose, I'm certainly not in favor of favoring one group over another indoors. And I'm in favor of following the guidelines that are going to be promulgated from the state and the county before we decide to take our town and make it less desirable for people to want to be here.
So I thank you, Ed, for drafting this and also just giving us the ability to, do it in a way that's effective and timely and not you know, because obviously we don't know if tomorrow there's gonna be a massive outbreak in the town of Newcastle, right? We don't have a crystal ball here, and so I'm certainly in that, I agree with Lisa, like having the public hearing and hearing from folks, because, you know, just taking informal polls, there were a few merchants who did share with me that they preferred to just run it the way that they've had, asking people to wear masks when they come in, and basically as the private business owner say, you know what, this is what I'm comfortable with, but then as it relates to the people who work there, they are because they're all vaccinated, they're comfortable not wearing masks. I think it's a case-by-case basis, but a public hearing would be helpful, and further, I do agree with Lisa that having an exemption for gyms is a little bit tricky, and I would prefer, just for public health safety reasons, that we remove that and make sure that everybody, if we do institute an indoor mask mandate, that it's all or nothing.
And we should all know that there was a planned public hearing, so it's not as if there was not going to be one.
Oh, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
know, I'm just,
Yeah.
I didn't mean it to sound that way at all.
So just to be clear, New York State adopted the CDC's guidelines for recommendation of masks of people of unknown vaccination status indoors. They are consistent. There's consistency between the CDC recommendations and the state's recommendations for New York.
So it sounds like there's a consensus, in fact, unanimity for going forward with a public hearing, then it's a question of whether this version of the proposed local law is one that you'd want to notice, and then talk about tweaks, refinements, changes at the public hearing, which is perfectly appropriate.
Okay.
If that's, then the board just needs to schedule a public hearing and get it on the calendar.
And how quickly can we expedite that? Because I don't think there's a reason to delay addressing these issues. Can we put it on for the next work session?
meeting-
What, the 14th?
The 14th is.
Yeah, that's
So
plenty
we
of
can do that
time.
then? Let's put it on for then.
Okay.
All right, so is there a motion then to schedule a public hearing on September
14th.
14th?
Great.
We'll just, otherwise we'll have to have a resolution on your next agenda, and it'll be another.
Okay.
Right,
So if we just
right.
make the motion
So
tonight.
I
and get
move
it on
to
the
set a
calendar.
public hearing on the mask mandate for September 14th, 2021 at Town Hall at, I don't know, 7 PM or at such other time as is practical.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Our next issue, my computer turned off, bear with me.
Okay, next on the agenda is a preliminary discussion of sidewalks along Douglas Road and requesting authorization to obtain land survey services. This was discussed, not necessarily studied, several years ago when we began studying sidewalks throughout town. Douglas Road was one of the ones that we looked at. At the time, we kind of dismissed it as possibly not being feasible. It's come up again, and we're going to discuss whether or not we want to move forward at this point.
So, Ed, and I guess Sabrina and Jill, whomever has looked at this in the past, we've looked at multiple locations for sidewalks over the years, and we actually had some ideas that we sat down, starting when Rob was supervisor, when Ivy was supervisor. For example, one that came to the forefront was potential connecting Gedney to the Millwood Hamlet, as well as some other streets. And we did some preliminary examination of Douglas Road, but not the full survey. And I think it's important to recognize that it may in fact not be plausible. It may be plausible. But Douglas, unlike some other streets like 120, is our, for lack of a better term, street. So we have a little bit more control over the possibility of that. So I think Lisa raised a good point before. We don't want to just study for the sake of studying. So it can be clear that this is a next step as opposed to recreating a wheel, because nothing has physically changed in the past 2, 3, 5 years.
And Jeremy, just
That's correct. The work that we did preliminary was really a desktop kind of overlaying the environmental features, really looking at how many driveways intersected where we would place a sidewalk. The work that we outlined for you to undertake now was a little bit more in depth to get exact analysis rather than, kind of an overview analysis.
And Jeremy, I was gonna clarify that because it's our road, that we're only required to get easements as opposed to takings that we would need if it was on a state road.
Right, right. Thank you for clarifying that, because I've even used the wrong term at time, taking an easement. I've interchanged them at times. So,
May I ask, I mean, not that this is sort of off topic, but in the short term, is there anything else we can do with DPW or the police department to make it safer for folks to walk on Douglas, as well as, I think it's Tanglewild and what's that other road, Kip? That connect there? Because I think that if it's signage or a white line where it just gives people the, notice that people are walking here, it really makes a vast difference. Any thoughts, Jill or Sabrina? I wish I asked the chief this when we saw him earlier, but I didn't.
But to add on to what Lauren's saying, I wish it was just those streets. It's a problem everywhere. I mean, people are speeding. I don't know if everyone's excited to be out of the house finally, but people are driving like crazy in this town, and I've seen near misses everywhere. On Whippoorwill, on Annandale, on Douglas, on Hardscrabble, I mean, everywhere. Valley View, I've seen it a few times, so I think it's more of even a global question than Lauren's asking. What can we do to get people to slow down?
Well, I will say, I met with the chief and Bart a few months ago, and they do audit the town roads and figure out, they aggregate all the complaints of, who's speeding, they get it from the neighbors, people call the police. Our residents are very good about reporting on each other. And so, in any event, they do have this document, and they have had their police officers come in, do the, pardon me, I don't know what that speed sign, that, like the Grafflin sign that tells you that you're going 35 in the school zone.
The electronic speed signs.
Thank you. And then also the signs that actually track it electronically. I just worry about this particular area because something had happened, and I apologize to everybody out here that it's reactive and not proactive, but as it relates to this, I feel like there is opportunity to get something done in this concentrated area right now.
Right.
So I don't know what that is,
Yeah.
Jill. I'm just, while we're in this mode of studying the feasibility of sidewalks, perhaps we look at ways to short-term fix it.
Yeah, Lauren, I think.
Okay, yeah.
I totally agree, and also with the initiative to see what we can do in the short term. And certainly one of the things that I have thought about is in some of these trouble spots in town where we may be facing either a really long time horizon for the installation of a sidewalk or an infeasibility, if we might have some flexibility around widening the shoulders of some of these roads with the recognition that people will be walking and they will be biking whether we make these improvements or not. Because of the proximity of these neighborhoods to town, it is just a given. And so we have cars and people in a situation that will continue in perpetuity. And so any improvements that we can make to make it a little safer would, I think, be welcome.
and the 30-second answer, when you get an easement, should you get one, would that, for example, allow us to pave, if someone agreed to do so, pave that little section if it's 2 additional feet
Sure,
of
the
their
easement's
property?
an agreement.
Yeah.
The
And-
agreement can stipulate that.
And there's no means by which to do that in the event that the homeowner said no, unlike a taking of property on if there was a greater good. You could, it's an easement or a taking, or it's just an easement?
You can
in
also,
this scenario?
you can take an easement as opposed to actually taking ownership of the property. You could have the right to use the property.
No, I get that, but could the taking and ownership be an option too?
Sure.
That could be. Right. Not that the town is looking to do that across the board, but just understanding what options are.
Mhm.
All right, anything else? No. All right, the next, Rob. I think why most are tuning in. Go ahead.
I think so. The next topic is the FGEIS. We have 4 sections and an appendix that have been provided by our consultants for review this evening. The sections are 2A land use, 2B, zoning. 2C, visual resources and community character. And 2K, air quality and noise. And then Appendix H, provided by Res Group, was the updated feasibility analysis.
And before we start, Ed, if you can help me just for clarity purposes, this is not an assessment of whether or not you like the form-based code or whether you approve of the form-based code. This is really addressing the adequacy of the responses from the consultant as to the questions asked.
Yeah, the secret regulations talk about accuracy and adequacy. Those are the words right out of the regulation. So it's really the board's task as the lead agency to look at the proposed responses, ask, the way of looking at it, are these complete responses? Have we addressed all of the comments? The board may not, there might not be unanimity in terms of how a comment is addressed, but that's something that you'll discuss as a board. I will say that there are many comments, period, but there are many comments that don't really call for a response that's empirical or based on a data where there's a right and a wrong answer. I mean, there are responses that are more qualitative. So the
Right.
board has to be comfortable that the comments have been answered again in an adequate and accurate way.
Okay, great, thank you. So Sabrina, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. I'm going to share my screen with folks that are zooming in tonight, so you will see my presentation. Hang on a second. Okay. So, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well tonight. It's nice to see you all. I apologize, I'm not with you in person, and I'll do my best to present to you as if I was there myself. My intention tonight is to walk you through the voluminous amount of material that was provided to you in advance of this meeting. And before I start, I want to introduce Bonnie Von Olson, who's with me tonight as well. She represents the consultant team who are leading this project for us, and they're the ones that are compiling this environmental review for you as the lead agency. So some of this may be repetitive for some of you, but I'm speaking to those who maybe have not heard this before or need a refresher. So a final generic environmental impact statement. When last we met, Bonnie Von Olson introduced the, what an FGEIS was and what it was intended to do. Ultimately, and Ed was really just talking about this, the FGEIS, the final generic environmental impact statement, is to provide responses to all substantive comments received throughout the comment period, both those who have been spoken to you, those comments during the hearings, or even those that have been submitted in written form. In addition to responding to comments, the FGEIS also compiles what we call thresholds or mitigations. And these are derived from the environmental impact analysis, as well as the environmental records. So tonight we're going to discuss some of those thresholds for the sessions that we're going to be reviewing.
Sabrina, just a second. I'm wondering if your display mode is correct, whether you want it to be a full screen slide.
Is it not a full screen slide?
It's not.
Hang on a minute. Is that a full screen?
No, we're seeing like a preview pane with your notes and the next slide.
Sabrina, go
Okay.
to display settings and you can
Hang on a second. Let me reshare. Thank you. It's what happens when you're dealing with two screens. We'll try this again. What are you seeing now?
Now it's in edit mode.
Let me
You have
disconnect
to
my.
go into slideshow, but then hit display options, and you may have to swap the note side to the slide
How
side.
about that?
That's
Oh,
it.
there you go.
That's it.
Yeah, I have a dual monitor, so I turned off my screen, so it's fine. Okay. So we went through this slide, what an FGEIS is. Where am I going to get to move this now? Okay, that. Okay. To date, on this slide, this is all of the sections of all the impact sections within the environmental review. Each one of these sections was discussed in the draft environmental impact statement, and it's organized in the final generic environmental impact statement in the same way. The 4 sections in red are the sections that we will be reviewing tonight. The land use section, the zoning section, visual resources and community character, and air quality and noise. Last time we met to discuss the FGEIS, Bonnie had presented to you natural resources and cultural resources, and those are the 2 areas in gray italic. There are 7 remaining sections that will be provided to you over the next coming weeks for your discussions later in September, I should say. So this kind of just outlines for you what you've received and what we're about to discuss tonight and what to expect moving forward. Talking about a completeness review. Now, and Ed spoke about this before he turned it over to me. The question before you as lead agency is to determine whether or not the responses adequately and accurately address the comments. Not whether or not you agree with the substance of those comments, but do they address the comments fully? So we're going to start real quickly with the first section, land use. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize for you the general areas of comments that we have received and responses that we have prepared. In general, there are a lot of comments regarding the consistency of the comprehensive of the form-based code with the comprehensive plan goals. So wanting to understand more of a deeper dive as to how those goals align with the form-based code. There were also comments regarding application of the form-based code, meaning what is the area, what is the boundary, where is it going to be placed? There were comments related to the limitations on the number of bedrooms, on the use and sale of town-owned lands, and there were comments regarding revitalization of the hamlet. And this all fell under the land use section of the DGEIS. Before I go into the thresholds, I want to kind of offer up to you as lead agency, do you have any specific comments or questions about that section within the DGEIS in regards to completeness? Or in the FGEIS, sorry. In regards to completeness.
Sabrina, I did have a comment. There's a section early in the document where it's outlined which of the goals of the comprehensive plan are addressed by the DGES and which ones are not, which I think is a great opportunity to reiterate that high concept. But the part that I thought could be helpful is a sub-bullet on those goals with just a very brief detail on how.
Okay.
And to just give you an example, one of the goals that's listed here is I'm going to get the wording probably a little messed up.
Generalize. It's okay.
But but it's about expansion of.
Laura, if you're looking at a particular page, if you find something, just let us know so we can.
Yeah, sure. I'm roughly on like 2A4. In that area, there was one about expand, enhance, and maintain parkland and recreational space.
Yep.
Which for most folks that are following this might not totally get that.
Okay.
And how it's consistent with that goal. If you're diving more deeply into the full study area, then you might remember that there was an expansion of the park area at the train station circle that would be a product of of the proposed full action in that space, and I think that's what it's referring to.
Is
But-
what it is referring to.
Okay.
I'll give you that.
But that, but just a little, like these sort of sub-bullet points of clarification could be very helpful in understanding what you were getting at when we say that these goals are compatible with, or that the DJAS is compatible with the comprehensive plan. The goals
Absolutely,
of
we
it.
can definitely do that, most definitely.
And to
Are there
Lori's
any other
point, Sabrina, can you also have them put in there why, I think they just completely ignored traffic in there. It didn't talk about that it's, one of the questions said like, what goals is this going to fulfill and what goals is it not going to fulfill? And traffic wasn't even in either one. So I'd like to know why.
Okay, I'd really have to look at that. I'll definitely look into that, Lisa, and I'll work with the consultant team to dive deeper into that. It may be that traffic falls under a different section in the DGEIS, but I will definitely check on that. Thank you.
Okay. And then I just had a general question too. When the consultants are answering these questions, are they answering them sort of objectively, or is the goal to answer them to sort of fit it into the form-based code? The reason I ask that is because, let's just say we're looking at reduction of maximum height of 4 stories. So when it was initially in the draft environmental impact statement, for instance, there was an initial return on cost threshold that was studied of 6%. Well, it turns out that 3 stories actually work under 6%. But now suddenly in this draft, that goalpost was moved up to 6.5%, so now 4 stories are required. To me, that's not super objective. That's trying to fit your data to prove a hypothesis as opposed to actually changing your hypothesis because it doesn't fit the data. So that's a little troublesome to me, and it actually makes me question the entire review of this document. So I'd like to really understand that, because I have a real issue with that, and I'm worried that the entire document now is completely inappropriate. So that's one thing I want to really understand, how this is being researched.
So Lisa, I'm gonna have to correct you there. The rest group analysis, the initial market scan, came to the same conclusion that the feasibility analysis came to in relation to 3 versus 4 stories. The new aspect in the additional work, the feasibility analysis, was introduction of affordability. So it's my understanding that the analysis and the answers are objective. They're not trying to fit into the form-based code, but really looking at an analysis that is based on the information that is available.
Right. It's just the goalposts were actually moved, so I'd really like to understand that. Because frankly, when we're reviewing something, I don't want somebody who's going to agree with me. I want someone who's going to tell me the truth so that we can make the right decisions.
I don't think.
Right. My understanding is that it's based on the truth. It's not fitting it into what we expect it to say.
Okay.
Bonnie, do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I'll definitely send you some stuff on it. I think respectfully, I think you're wrong on this one, and we should look at it. But I'm looking at the people.
I'll definitely look
I'm looking
into
at
it,
some
Lisa.
of the people in the
Listen,
audience
I'm
today,
happy
and
to
I
look
think they're going to probably be able to speak to it even better than I can, just looking at the people who are here. So I may just wait and let them talk to it.
Bonnie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that Patty Adele from Res Group isn't on the call tonight. And that is one of the topics that you have now to read thoroughly, the revised or updated appendix that she put together. And there are also a couple of other chapters that we haven't submitted yet, which have much more detailed responses on this whole issue. It's It comes up in land use, it comes up in zoning, it comes up in socioeconomic. So there will be more complete answers than the ones you've seen so far. But in a general response, Lisa, to your comment about the responses themselves, as you know, it's a comment response document. And it's an environmental record, and it's really, the purpose is to provide factual responses. Some may just refer back to the DEIS because the answers were in there. Others may have evolved because conditions have changed or whatever the situation being, but it's intended to be exactly as you said, it's intended to be a factual presentation of the environmental record so that the town board can make the best decision possible based on the facts. So that's all I wanted to add to that.
Okay, and we can definitely dig deeper into that, Lisa. I'm happy to look into it for you.
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any other comments that you guys would like to make at this time regarding the comments and response in the land use section?
I had one more comment. The example for this is on page 10, 2A10. And I mentioned this, I think, previously, where it's the response, I think A6, is referring to the time horizon for a 15-year build-out period, which, speculating that would be extended to even longer with the town board's intention to apply the form-based code to only a small part of the study area. And, there are a few examples throughout the documents where there's some reference to the new direction. One whole section that's dedicated just to questions from the public about the new direction. And so obviously it makes sense to address the new direction in that section. I am hoping that when the new direction itself isn't the subject of the comment, where we can use the current intent to apply to a smaller study area as an example of how you can pace these things over time. Rather than kind of restricting, I don't want this to create, I want the DGIS to, fulfill its purpose as a study of the whole study area and not have constraints built into it saying, well, this actually only applies to this one space. I think the board made a decision to make it inclusive of the whole study area. So there is occasionally a language that pops up that seems like it creates some restriction that could just be edited to something like the DGIS envisions 15-year build-out period that could be extended and managed by this and subsequent town boards implementing zoning change to fractions of the study area, as is before the board now, or as the current board is intending, something like that.
Well, the thing is, I hear what you're saying, but if we're gonna believe the majority of the town board that's saying it's only gonna be applied to North Greeley, then to turn around and say, oh no, but this is actually good for the whole study area, then that means that the possibility of expanding it to more than North Greeley significantly expands, because then there's nothing else that needs to be studied. So, my concern always has been we're talking about this fake new direction, but since we're studying the entire 72 acres still, and this applies to the entire 72 acres still, that claiming that it's only applying to North Greeley is really disingenuous. So anything we can put in there, if that's actually, you want that to actually be true, anything we can put in there that limits it is I think very important.
I hear both of what you were saying. Lori, I think I understand what you're talking about, not to use to respond to the comment and not use the new direction as a crutch, as an answer, even though it is a benefit.
Right.
So we can definitely take a look at that and rewording of those and make sure that they're not being used as a control, if you will. Okay, anything else? And again, this isn't the only time that you'll have to ask questions or offer comments on this work.
I mean,
So-
Sabrina,
so-
I'm gonna have to send you things because honestly, I have comments on almost everything that I'll be truthful. I could not get through the whole thing, especially because so many things say in answer to this, refer to A4, D5, C3. It was difficult to read to begin with. And it's obviously a lot of pages, 400 and something pages to go through. And if you're going to do a good job, it takes a very long time to go through it. So I appreciate we'll have more opportunities to look at it. But, you know, I have concerns about the bedroom limitations in there and some other things. So I'll send those over to you.
So what will happen is, you know, if I, for example, you send me comments, we're going to digest the comment and look at it in relation to the document and then bring it back to you as a board to make a determination as to how to address it, right? Because Lisa, these are your comments as a town board member. And if they dictate change, then the entire board has to agree to those changes.
Right, of course.
Okay, but I'm happy to take comments from you folks individually and digest them and kind of turn them into something that you all can consider in a concise manner at a town board meeting.
I think that'll be helpful.
Okay. All right. So given that there's nothing at this time any more than what you've already said, I really wanted to move to thresholds. And we talked earlier about how a threshold or a mitigation is derived from the information that's contained within the DGEIS that comes through the comments and response, and that it is in totality grasped from the environmental record. Under land use, there's several thresholds or mitigations that will be used to measure each of the applications against. One is the area of the form-based district to be mapped. We've been talking about the North Greeley area. There's been discussion of reducing the maximum height. There's no more 5 stories being proposed throughout the form-based district. We are limited to a maximum height of 4 stories. We've also identified that any re-subdivision involving lands exceeding half an acre will go before the planning board for a project review, for a public hearing. Applications containing parking garages will need to demonstrate that they are consistent with the physical intent of the form-based code, and that they're designed to minimize visual impacts. And this is where, Lisa, you referenced the bedroom limitation. There will be a threshold regarding a bedroom limitation that is consistent with that was conducted in the build-out analysis. Specifically, the build-out analysis examined 1 and 2 bedroom apartment units. For example, if a project proposed 6 3-bedroom units, it would not meet the threshold that you set with bedroom limitations. So this is the flavor of the thresholds that you will find under land use. Any comments or questions regarding the thresholds?
So I just have a general question. How does this correlate then with what can be done practically? So for instance, you know, applications containing a parking garage, et cetera. I feel like this form-based code is missing kind of like the architectural piece. And the reason I'm saying that is because so we're saying parking garages, let's say, are going to now go, to minimize visual impacts, they're going to need to go behind buildings, let's say, so that we're not seeing them from the street. But is that architecturally and from an engineering perspective able to be built? Those lots are not deep. So is it something that, you know, it's one thing to say we're having a form-based code and yeah, we want you to do this. It's another thing if it's actually a practical to be able to do. So when do we go through and do that analysis to see if what's being proposed here actually can function in the real world?
Well, Lisa, you know, that is a very fair point. Today, our code cannot be fulfilled on a majority of the lots in the hamlet because you can't fit parking on them because they're too shallow. There's a reason that anything greater than a half acre goes through a public hearing process because in our community, that is the size where you could possibly put a parking garage.
So,
You know,
okay, that's not
So
really
your
answering my
question is very valid, but we don't do as part of legislation on the ground, real life analysis of properties.
But we're being asked to, adopt a very large development plan for this town that we don't know if it can actually function.
In certain size properties, it will be able to function. It's zoning legislation. It's not a development plan.
Well, it's both. It is, I got a legal
So,
opinion
but Sabrina,
on it.
you're, as you were saying earlier, our existing zoning is for every location is not practical to employ a full build out of existing zoning with the parking requirements that is currently in the zoning legislation in town.
Sure, correct.
So it's a
There's
site by
several
site
different
challenge
factors.
for the property owner.
Well, right,
Correct.
but now we don't have a planning board involved.
they-
Except if it's more than 5 acres that happen to be combined.
Right, but the issue.
Half an acre.
We're
I mean,
sort
a
of-
half an acre, I'm sorry.
We're sort of digressing from the belief in the success of the form-based code and what it is to the FGIS. But to answer that question, it is practical in some places, it's not practical in others. And some of the concern that people have about all of a sudden there being these parking garages all over, none of that happens without public land. And as of now, unless some future town board down the road decides that they want to go and the community wants to go that route as well, there is no place to put that type of parking.
Well, that's just
Because
not
these
true.
lots can't accommodate that scale. And if it
Some
were to
lots
accommodate
can
half an
and
acre or
some
more,
lots
that would be
cannot.
back at the planning board.
No, see, some can and some can't, as Sabrina just said, it's
No, I'm
not
talking about
just
parking
public
structure. I'm
land.
talking about parking structure.
It's not just public land, we're saying, put it behind, this is in there.
I get it.
That the threshold is you gotta put it behind the buildings.
I get that, but if you're gonna go before a greater than a half an acre, you're gonna go back to the planning board regardless. And the planning board's gonna have that authority to say, no, we don't want this, or it's not gonna work.
But
So
potentially it
that
could be
would
built on .4, and which wouldn't have to go to a planning board. It could be built on something that's larger that doesn't have to be, that's not subdivided. It could be built on one.
So
One
if it's
whole
on a tenth of an acre, if it can fit on a tenth of an acre, you most likely would only get one car in it because you have to have egress and access into and out of it.
But-
It has to be located
wait, is that
behind
true,
the
Sabrina?
building.
Like, I thought somebody could combine 4 tenth of an acre properties to .4, which would not involve bringing the planning board in.
Correct, but you will still have difficulty fitting in a parking structure on a shallow lot.
Okay, so then that brings me back to how are we being asked to say there's no environmental impacts if we think that it's not even feasible to do? We're asking them to do something that's not actually practically able to be done. So that's where I'm having trouble, and this isn't meant to be contentious, it's meant to me to understand how we're being asked to sort of approve something, and eventually with a finding statement, we're saying there are no adverse findings that can't be appropriately mitigated, right? So part of this mitigation is, it says right there that this is a mitigation measure, but it can't practically
It's a
be done, you're
threshold.
saying, and we didn't even do that analysis. So that's where I'm having trouble when you're going to ask me to approve something that there's a big section of analysis that we don't even know if these will work. And now you're telling me that they actually won't.
I don't have a
I'm-
crystal ball, Lisa, and I haven't done a lot by lot analysis, but we're creating zoning legislation which allows for placing a garage on a property, right? In order for that garage to be placed on a property, it has to be located where it is not facing a primary street, where it is behind the second level of a building, of a line on the property, right? And you have to be able to access that. There are standards in relation to the construction of garages that have to be consistent with the visual impact analysis of the environmental record. Right? Today, if you can't park it, you can't build it.
Sabrina, I want to move this conversation along so we don't get stuck on this particular issue, but ultimately, this conversation is turning to what it seems to be, you need a parking garage to make this happen. Not all lots are going to need that by any stretch of the imagination, especially because we see from some of the lots now that have 2 stories or 3 stories in terms of units. So let's move on, and this is a conversation we can continue other time, but we're kind of digressing from the purpose of this adequacy question.
Well, I don't think so. I mean,
So-
I'm happy to
so-
move on, but I think the point of my question was not, again, to be contentious, to say if I'm supposed to decide if this is adequate, if I don't know if it can practically function, how am I supposed to make that decision?
I think,
I think part of the disconnect may be that we're looking at a secret document, which is a very high level of generality. What are the visual impacts? Where generally on the lot would parking go? Well, we don't want to see it on the street. We want it in the middle or back third of the lot. But that's about as far as the secret analysis is going. For the nuts and bolts of how it's going to be parked, you really have to get into the legislation. And we don't have that in front of you tonight. We'll get there, but it's not tonight.
Could I just add one more thing to that, Ed and Sabrina?
Sure.
Just going back again to the really big picture, the environmental review provided a build-out analysis, which does show a plan. I think that's what you're reacting to, is that's the plan, and it's not the plan, it's just a potential hypothetical plan. And it makes some broad assumptions, although it does also make realistic assumptions on how wide or narrow a building that has residential, a hallway with residential apartments in it, and how wide a parking garage would have to be to have 2 aisles, and some of the dimensional requirements. And that's why the assumptions were made for some of the parcels to be combined, because as Sabrina was saying, it would have to be a certain size acreage lot to support a 3-story mixed-use building, to have the garage that goes with it. So, and again, as you've read over and over in the EIS, the build-out is a series of assumptions, and they're felt to be realistic assumptions, but it's not necessarily saying this is what would be built everywhere in every condition. It's an example that's meant to be realistic for evaluation of the impacts.
Okay.
all right, Sabrina, if you can move.
Okay,
move
sure.
this forward.
Moving on. The next section that we asked you to look at, my slides are not moving. Bear with me. Is zoning. And when we talk about zoning, we talked about referring the applications or comments and responses involved referring comments to the county and other entities, streamlining the review process, looking at alternates to a form-based code. There were comments and responses involving as-of-right uses, parkland fees, and conflicts of interest. So the zoning section was a little bit different than land use in that it covered an area of not so much on legislation, but more zoning related issues, if you will. Do you have any comments or questions regarding the comments and responses in zoning?
I don't. Does anyone?
I do not.
Okay.
I had a quick question that is,
Sure.
I think is a typo in the table on the existing requirements for review and then the proposed requirements for review. It's on page 14. And in the site plan approval paragraph for proposed, saying re-subdivision of property greater than 0.05 acres.
Oh, meant to be 0.5?
That is 0.5, right? This isn't some other category of restriction
Yes.
around re-subdivision. Okay, thanks.
There's an extra 0 in there.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. So thresholds when it comes to zoning, right? And so a threshold or a mitigation that is being proposed for your consideration is to review applications to ensure they're compliant with the form-based district standards. And so those, again, we haven't completely gone through the development of the legislation, but there will be standards in that legislation. And from a zoning compliance perspective, each application should be consistent with it. We also have to review the applications against the thresholds that are contained through the seeker process. So both in the finding statement and the FGEIS. The Chappaqua Central School District would be notified if projects are within the notification area of their properties. And there's referrals to the county planning department, police, fire, and other entities as enumerated in the legislation. Outside of the 6 architectural styles, if you proposed a 7th, then you would have to go through full architectural review board review. And so this is just a quick bullet list of the main areas of thresholds that we would establish under zoning.
Great.
Do you have any questions
Just
regarding
to
these?
confirm, Sabrina, so you, as the planning department, are doing all of this, right? It doesn't go to anyone else unless it's
not the planning
going above
department.
the 5.5 of an acre, and it's a subdivision issue.
It's the development department, not just planning.
Yes,
It
the
involves-
development department, in-house.
Yes, it involves your in-house professional staff.
Okay.
From your engineer to your building inspector to your environmental coordinator, assistant building inspector, myself.
Yep. No, I know who you are. Okay, so again, just to confirm and for everyone to understand that the planning board's not involved unless it's over that threshold. The ARB is only involved if it's outside of those listed styles, correct?
The 2 ARB members, as the draft legislation is written today, 2 ARB members will be reviewing the architectural detailing provided with an application and measuring it against the form-based code requirements.
Okay.
Moving on to visual resources and community character. When it came to comments and responses regarding visual resources and community character, the comment and response related to the height of buildings, big topic. The impact, the visual impact on 149 King Street. There was discussion, comment, and responses regarding the actual architectural styling, the details of that styling. There were comments and responses related to mixed use, and that means both commercial and residential use as approved uses. And there were also comments related to economic revitalization. So comment and responses regarding all of those topics were included in the section we provided to you. Do you have any comments regarding any of those comments or responses for those comments in that section that you've read thus far?
I mean, I did have a comment which I thought was interesting and people should be aware. I think it was, try maybe 2C8, page 8. As I understand it, if in the study area, the number of units exceeded that which was studied, that once you hit that amount, if you breach that threshold, that would then trigger a secret review and stop that further building. So if there's a concern or fear that somehow down the road we sold all of our property, because that's the assumption made to make all these consolidations, we sold all of our public land somehow, and this actually happened, if somehow it exceeded the number of units as studied, secret would come back into play and make a pause, if you will.
Correct.
So Jeremy, when we were talking about this topic, right, my question was, how does that apply when we are starting with a much smaller parcel?
You mean a much smaller area?
Yeah.
We are trying to, so the thresholds we're kind of putting before you right now are the easier thresholds, if you will.
Yeah.
And let's use wastewater for a moment, right? We're trying to drill down as part of the analysis to look at how much wastewater use we already did it for the entire form-based code study area. We also have to look to the North Greeley area and determine what was calculated under the build out for the North Greeley area. So we have a threshold established for that area.
Got it.
And
So that we'll
when-
arrive at that whatever that number is for a maximal unit number for that
Correct.
specific area, that if it were proposed to be exceeded would require a new analysis. Got it. Thank you.
Correct. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. And it works that way with cars to be parked, water, sewer.
I thought it was also helpful, Sabrina, for those who haven't actually looked at the materials. At the ends of this section, there was there was pictures of different viewpoints looking in different directions, reflecting what currently exists, and then what, assuming things were maximized, what you would see or not see. So I would just encourage residents to look at that and see the difference, which is not as drastic as one would think at all in many of these view sheds. But that's
Right. The diagrams that you're speaking of demonstrate the existing height of buildings, what is allowed under our existing code, and what would be allowed under the proposed form-based code.
Right. And that starts, I think, at 2C45.
Okay. And so moving on, looking at the thresholds that would be set here, right? Again, there would be a threshold to make sure that the applications are reviewed to be in compliance with the form-based code district requirements such as architecture, appearance, and height. The architectural review board members would review the architectural detailing of each of the projects. Full ARB review if the project is outside of the 6 styles that are actually approved as part of the form-based code. Review of applications in relation to natural light and view sheds, and review of solar panel locations as far as site-specific applications to make sure there's no unwanted glare or visual impact of those solar panels. There's also an italicized bullet that I'd like to bring your attention to. We're going to discuss this later on in this discussion. It's consideration of 3 stories on the east side of North Greeley Avenue. We need to establish some thresholds regarding that directive. Okay, so we're going to hold on to that for a moment, and I'm going to move on and we'll come back to it. The next section I wanted to run through was natural resources. When we received comments and responses regarding natural resources, we received comments on tree removal, on rock and subsurface composition and what the materials underneath the ground surface are made of. We received comments and prepared responses regarding the environment and climate change. And we also received comments and responses regarding streams and water quality under natural resources. Do you folks have any comments regarding that section, section 2D, natural resources at this time?
Nope.
I do not.
Okay, so when we start talking about thresholds, I had used the example of wastewater threshold. Under natural resources, all of the projects will have to adhere to our existing environmental protection ordinances. And just to kind of refresh everyone, that means Chapter 108 steep slopes, Chapter 108A stormwater management and erosion and sediment control, Chapter 137, wetlands, Chapter 121, tree removal, and Chapter 44, blasting. We're also have included Chapter 90, which is our noise regulation. Under natural resources, we also have a threshold that says there are to be no exceptions allowed based on lot size, number of units, or building size. And there will be site-specific conditions for environmental compliance, which will be examined during the completeness review. So if an application comes in and they do not adhere to our tree removal requirements, the application will be deemed incomplete and will be denied. That just kind of gives you an example. Any comments regarding those thresholds?
No.
Okay. Moving on to air quality and noise. When we looked at all of the comments and prepared responses regarding air quality and noise, we looked at, to address the increased air and noise pollution from development that would occur under the form-based code. We looked at we were asked to comment and respond to comments on 5-story buildings and the train tracks. Construction's impact and the noise associated with construction. Dust control from construction. Consider the additional cars and the pollution associated with additional cars. So those were kind of the areas of comment and response preparation regarding air quality and noise. Do you have any comments regarding anything that you may have read within that comment response section?
I do not.
No.
Okay. We're going to move on to the thresholds. This is a list of, in general, the thresholds to be established for air quality and noise. Project must adhere to the local ordinances relating to construction and air quality and noise. And again, we list them: the noise chapter, stormwater management, erosion control, blasting. Site-specific conditions for potential adverse impacts to sensitive receptors due to air quality and noise will need to be analyzed with each specific project during the pre-application review stage. Noise from proximity to the trains will also need to be incorporated. How is that going to be dealt with? Will be incorporated into the town's checklist. Regarding noise during construction, Chapter 90 will remain in effect, particularly noise in proximity to schools and what's called sensitive receptors. There will be limitations on construction during nighttime hours. There will be potential regarding impacts to air quality during construction. Our existing town ordinance regarding construction will apply, which includes best management practices for dust control. We also have controls today that if development is within 500 feet of a public school, the school district will be notified of the construction schedule, a minimum of 60 days prior to the start of construction. Are there any comments regarding those thresholds?
Now, Sabrina, I just wanted to point out that section 2D was not on the agenda or shared.
The section 2D was shared with you last week.
Oh, right, okay, I read it then, I was.
Thresholds were not discussed last week,
Okay.
so I included it here. This section and the cultural resources section.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay.
Sabrina, can I just ask a quick question, just going on 2K?
Sure.
So some of the answers, like I'm looking at K5, for instance, which is
What page is it?
2K5.
What page is it in the?
2K5.
Does it pop up on the PDF? I mean, on the.
Oh,
I think the 466.
I don't see that on my
I'll find it. I'll find it.
computer.
That's all right. That's all
It's
Oh,
214.
214.
right. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, mine doesn't do that so easily. So, I wish there was some sort of actual analysis. Instead of just saying like, air quality from new traffic is not anticipated to be a significant adverse impact. Based on what? Like, it's assuming people are walking. Well, we know most people in town have cars, because if they need to get anywhere other than within downtown, often they do need a car. Yes, they can take public transportation, but that doesn't necessarily coincide with what they want to do. So I feel like, and this isn't just this is just one example that I had marked, where it's making statements, but there's no real backup to any of the statements. Like, I could say that. And then it's saying, oh yeah, people are buying electric cars. Well, how do you know? Are you saying that all of these people are going to buy electric cars? And then it's comparing us to White Plains. Yes, I'm very glad that our carbon dioxide thresholds are below that in White Plains. That's a much larger town, and I wouldn't want ours to ever come close to that. But it's still going to, I would imagine, just as a layperson, if you're putting in the maximum build out, which is what this is saying, even at full build out, so you're putting in all of those apartments, I would imagine that yes, it would have a significant impact. And if you're telling me, not you, but if the analysis here is telling me no, then I want it to be based on something. And it's not, it's just saying, yeah, we don't anticipate it's gonna have a problem. Based on what? I could have told you that for free. Like, and it's not just here, it's in many of these answers where it's just making kind of blanket statements. We don't expect this to be a problem. This isn't an issue. But it's not giving us any background. It's not researched. So, like, can we get research on some of these things?
Well, I do feel the need to point out the first threshold here, the existing codes, right, which require a project today to employ best management practices. And when I say a best management practice, it's like wetting down your site to control dust.
Okay,
right?
but I'm talking about parking here. I'm
But
talking
let
about
me
the
just
answers.
I'm giving you some examples of,
Okay.
of techniques that are used in the construction arena to address this, to address dust, to address, the construction. Right?
Okay.
So it's sweeping the site. It's not letting any dirt come off the site as you're driving trucks onto it. It's making sure that there's proper traction and pads to get the dirt out of the tires before you enter and exit the construction site. And if a contractor is not adhering to the proper maintenance of those best management practices, they will be fined. They will be ticketed by the town, because they have committed to complying with our ordinance. And that is just an example regarding dust, right? When it comes to noise, this is saying there will be no night construction allowed. Right now, we have a noise ordinance that limits the hours of construction. All projects under this form-based code must adhere to the noise provisions within our town code.
Okay, I appreciate that, but that has nothing to do with what I just asked. What I was saying is that our consultants are giving responses like, we don't expect there to be an increase in pollution from traffic based on all the cars that are gonna come here, even in a full build-out. Based on what? Nothing, there's nothing in here.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
I'm just looking at the second paragraph under that same response. And what it's saying is that air quality in your area is significantly below thresholds, national, federal thresholds for air quality.
That's great,
And
I'm glad.
The reason it mentions White Plains is because air quality is measured in big regions, and the closest measuring point is White Plains. And it says that White Plains is 30% below permissible levels, and the Chappaqua is even that much further, even with a build-out. So we can certainly give you more detail on the data for the particular area, but that's what the response was meant to address.
But with all due respect, the question was not, are we gonna be below thresholds. The question is it gonna have a significant impact on our air quality? Even if our air quality gets 100% worse, it may still be below what's allowed under levels of carbon monoxide transmissions. It doesn't mean it's great.
No,
So,
but the
but
levels are
the question
intended, I
was
believe
not,
they're-
is it below? The question is, air quality will deteriorate. Not, are we going to be living, next to a power plant? It's saying it's going to increase and deteriorate, and you're saying, no, it won't, but not based on anything. You're basing it on, okay, we're below the thresholds for bad air quality is wonderful. I'm glad we are. I'd like to keep it that way. And I want to make sure we're not, this question is saying, is it going to significantly deteriorate? And you didn't answer that question.
All right, so,
And this is just one of many where it just gives blanket statements. I would love to see kind of backup to those statements. Where are you getting those from?
So,
I understand your question.
but Lisa, I
I'm thinking
think
of
what
one
they're-
common way we address noise is by giving a list of, how loud is a leaf blower, how loud is a jackhammer, sort of things that people can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can certainly try to find a similar health-related air quality effects that maybe we can insert in there to give more backup for what you're requesting. We'll look into that.
I personally, just based on your experience, Bonnie, and working through documents like this and answering the questions and providing data, the data that you're showing is that something that we can understand as it relates to what currently is around us. The White Plains is not an amazing example, however, that's what you had. And so in any circumstance, it's always, there has to be a lever of standard, right? Like then you use that standard as a comparison. Everything, I think, in general, like what I think is loud may not be as loud as what you think is loud. Like it can all be relative, but providing an example of a municipality that is close to us is helpful. And I mean, I can agree to a certain degree, Lisa, that you don't want it to get to that level of White Plains. At the same time, taking a first stab at what they've done historically. Like, this is not Bonnie's first rodeo. Like, she's done this a long time. So I just think that providing some concrete standard as well as just giving us a number and giving us some sort of comparable town that we know is helpful. Net, like, I know Bonnie's gonna keep, pushing for more information, which is always helpful, but again, like, I think this is a good start, and this is why we're doing this exercise.
I agree, it's a good start, but, we're being asked in not the distant future to say that this is complete. And if there's no data backing up blanket statements, to me, that's not complete.
I just
And
think that there
even
is
though
data though, Lisa. Like,
Bonnie's
that's where
done
we
this for a
disagree.
long time, that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't really sway me that it's not including appropriate information.
I want to move on from this topic. I do want to add one thing, though, before we do so. As I understand, most of the form-based code in the district that is being studied beyond the form-based code is beyond a matter of right. You're really only going up an acre. You're going up a floor for the most part from what's allowable now. So there's a lot of people like yourself who oppose the form-based code, but want to help facilitate the growth or building of these buildings to where they can be now, where it's permissible now as a matter of right. So what really just scratches my head is the argument, and we'll put this out there and discuss it another time, that if you add one extra floor, and otherwise keep what we have now and don't have a form-based code, if we add one extra floor in some spots, that all of a sudden it's going to disrupt the entirety of our environmental well-being of this community. And it seems just disingenuous to make that argument if we are going to allow it now because it's allowable as a matter of law, if it can actually be facilitated and happen, and many of the opponents are saying let's find ways to allow the buildings to be built, then the difference of one floor does not make this something that is environmentally improper, if you will. That all being said, Bonnie will look into it, provide if there's more information to provide, and I think we should move forward.
Just to explain though, I know you've read this. This is over 72 acres. It's proposing building in places that don't even currently have buildings. So that's, I understand what you're saying and you want to make me look bad, that's okay. But
It's not about making look bad, it's a statement, it's a statement
I'm
of fact.
trying to get to,
Not to be
we are,
defensive.
the current law is what it is. None of us
Okay.
put that in place. Had we put that zoning law in place, maybe we would have been asking these questions, but now we're being asked to implement something new. So to ask these questions is fully appropriate,
No
and to
one's saying
get
they're not
fulsome answers to that, when we have a fiduciary obligation to do what's right for this town, is also very appropriate, especially given that we have paid a significant amount of money to get those answers.
All right, so if we can move on to the next subject, thank you, Sabrina.
Sure. So the last section that I'd like to share thresholds. You received this section and had comments about it at your last meeting, but the thresholds regarding cultural resources are new. I want to summarize the comments and responses to kind of bring you back to last week's discussion where the comments and responses involved the New York State Registry of Historic Places. They were comment and responses regarding historically significant sites. The train depot was the subject of many comments and responses in this section. The Center Street Firehouse was also a building that was under much examination in this section. There was a lot of discussion regarding the 5-story impacts on historic structures and landmarks. So, you know, the thresholds regarding cultural resources relate to ensuring that all projects in the form-based district will be required to abide by existing state and local requirements related to historic landmark properties and cultural resources. And this relates to Chapter 76 of the Town Code. Within the form-based code, there's an identification of 4 local landmarks, and the threshold indicates the process to be followed if any of these 4 landmarks are to be altered as part of a project. The form-based code also the study area also includes 3 buildings or properties that are listed on the New York State and the National Historic Registers. It's different than our local landmarks registry. So there are appropriate processes to be followed if a project involves one of these properties. I think it is important to note that the build-out analysis did not assume changes to any landmarked or historic property as recognized by our local ordinance, New York State's ordinance, or national registry listing. None of the structures examined within the form-based code study area are located in the North Greeley area. That's important for you to know off the top. Any comments regarding the thresholds?
Hey Sabrina, let me just ask one quick question, because I don't remember this, because we looked at this section last time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, the Center Street Firehouse, I know
Correct.
they've been trying to sell that for a while. So, this doesn't restrict that from happening, correct?
Nothing in here restricts that.
Okay,
Nothing in our Chapter 76 restricts that.
okay. Thanks.
Okay?
Yep.
Anyone else?
Nope.
Okay. So, before we get to discussion of the 3 stories on the east side of North Greeley, I just wanted to run through the next steps so that you all had kind of a sense of where we're going. So there are 2 town board work sessions on 9/14 and 9/21. And there's a list of 7 sections on the left-hand side of this slide, which list all of the sections that still need to be provided to you. So we're hopeful that we will be able to provide them to you prior to your next 2 meetings. And it is my hopeful anticipation that prior to your last work session, you will receive a compiled document of all sections, introduction, appendices, as well as table of contents of the GEIS. With that, the table of contents will contain a listing of all comments received, as well as a reference to a page number where those comments are responded to. And that will be helpful for all of the public who's interested in how their comments were addressed. So I'm hoping to have that to you prior to your 9/21 meeting.
Thank you.
Let's talk about visual resources and community character. So you all have had a discussion regarding regarding the east side of North Greeley Avenue. And there's been a desire to limit that east side, and I'm going to take my mouse. Can you see my mouse?
Yeah.
Whoops. That's not good. Of limiting this side of the street, which is currently dictated to be 2 to 4 stories, this green box, that limitation of 4 stories. You have all discussed making it 3 stories. As part of making it 3 stories, we have been considering thresholds that kind of dictate how it is to be treated. The reason for the 3 stories is to lessen the visual impact and offer mitigation for King Street residences, right? This area has a required retail on the first floor, the orange line. We need to consider that. We need to consider the AFFH requirement and the new analysis that Rest Group conducted, their feasibility analysis, which examined 30%, 60%, 80%, 100, 120% AMI of a 3-story residential building. They did not counter in first floor commercial. Okay, so I wanted to get the town board's thoughts on a couple of different renditions. How do you feel about the required retail area in this section? How do you feel about application of the affordable housing requirement? Ultimately, Rest Group's analysis said to us, at 3 stories, requiring affordable housing at 30% and 60% AMI does not meet the return on cost that a contractor, developer, property owner would want to see in developing these properties.
And
At
what's
80
the return on, what's that requirement?
It's at 6.5%. Is
Okay.
what they like to see.
That's the one I was concerned that it was
I know.
6% in the DGIS, but now it's 6.5 for some reason.
Well, again, Lisa, I want to compare oranges to oranges. I believe in the DGEIS, we did not ask them to consider affordable housing. Again, we need to go back and look at it, and I promise you, Bonnie and I will
think
go
we
back
did.
and look at it,
But, okay,
okay?
yeah, let me know.
So Sabrina, I
Most
think,
definitely will.
I think on the east side of Greeley, just based on the feedback from residents as well as residents who live near that area, I think that it is appropriate to keep at 3 stories. At the same time, just looking at the data and looking at the economic feasibility as it relates to wanting to reinvigorate, a piece of parcel or property there, I don't know if we should require retail on the first floor. And, some of the feedback that I've been hearing from people who are empty nesters, especially, candidly, it's a family member, but my father-in-law walks on canes. He had Guillain-Barré, and he would love a first floor unit just for ease and accessibility. So I don't know if that is something that could be considered if the town board or folks, I just think that would be appropriate in that part of North Greeley because it's not necessarily in the retail district, if you will. It's more so, I feel like the heart of downtown is at the entrance of King and Greeley and then going South Greeley where you've got Hip Kid and, Royal and House of 29 and Squires. So I would certainly feel comfortable with having first floor residential on North Greeley.
Would you do it on both sides?
I don't think so, no.
Just one side.
But you wouldn't have
sorry, you wouldn't remove the first floor commercial, or you would allow first floor residential on both sides?
I would allow first floor residential on the east side, limiting it to 3 stories. And then on the west side, where the Rite Aid building is, I think 4 stories is appropriate, but I think keeping it as a retail
Okay.
first floor is also ideal.
I share that view, Lauren. I agree with that assessment.
I guess first I want to point out that as in this illustration, the area that we're looking at, the properties that bound King Street they're excluded from the legislation.
You're talking about the orange line on King
Yeah,
Street, Laura?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. This doesn't impact.
This is a greater screenshot than the actual form-based
Right,
code
right.
area, yes.
That we're not talking about the properties that are on King Street or Lower King
Lower
Street.
King.
No, you are not. Your North Greeley area runs just behind the first property line,
Okay.
rear
And-
property line.
But the orange line designates where first floor commercial is currently required.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, not currently required, but is required for the form-based code study area.
Got it. Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, similar to Lauren, where we have, where we're moving toward, I think, a 3-story cap on the east side, I would be in favor of removing the ground floor commercial requirement.
So and again, I want to bring you back to the rest group analysis. At 3 stories residential, 30 and 60% AMI does not work. And there is some risk at 80%, although it's a little risk.
Right. You know, I've been thinking about this question, and I actually think that this creates an opportunity for us to, create the housing diversity that has been part of the objective for this action, for this legislation. And so, so I would be in favor of, on the east side, where we are proposing capping at 3 stories, that we gear the affordable requirement toward a workforce-like requirement, so that it is meeting the threshold. And because we're really, trying to stimulate some investment in this region, and so we would like to have a zoning model that supports that investment, and not just and not just passes a razor threshold into possible feasibility, but toward attractiveness. So if we have on the east side, where we have a 3-story, where we're proposing a 3-story limit, an AMI that I would consider anywhere between 80 and 100%, which I think is what we're talking about for workforce. And then on the west side, striving to keep the lower AMI to have a truly affordable requirement with the 4-story cap. Where we land on that, I'm certainly open to discussion. I think if 60% is consistent with what we're using at Reader's Digest property, creating more of those opportunities in the community seems like a good idea to me. In terms of the ground floor commercial on the, we're really talking about 2 parcels when we look at the property lines on the west side of the road that had initially a commercial requirement. Removing that ground floor commercial requirement for the west side of the road would actually not be such an issue for me either. I would be okay with removing the ground floor commercial requirement for both sides of the road in this area. But again, open to discussion.
To follow up on Lori's comment, and Lori and I discussed this, and I agree, while it does not follow the model code that the county put out, that's certainly not mandatory, but the principle is there that exists, that we want to provide not just affordable housing as best we can at least 10%, not capping it as some may think at 10%, but then you're providing workforce opportunities, which some folks rightfully identified was lacking too. So this gets you to where you want to be within reason. It's a start. It's a start to get there. But as it stands now, although I'd like to see retail stay on the west side, and east side can be all residential. And also, I'll second what Lori mentioned before, as you discussed. If 60% is where we are now elsewhere, I would certainly support that as that threshold in the affordables.
All right, so my concern is, while I definitely advocate for affordable housing, I'm also cognizant of the fact that one of the reasons this even was considered, and that one of the tenets of our comprehensive plan, was to increase vibrancy in the downtown. So I've spoken with many merchants and just used common sense that if we have an opportunity with North Greeley to double the size of our downtown retail district. Everyone touts, Katona, how great it is, because it's one straight shot street. Well, look at how long that street is. We have the opportunity, if we can really develop that street appropriately, to double the amount of our retail district. Now, if we don't require retail in anywhere on that street, you are now taking what could have really become more of a vibrant downtown and completely restricted it, because now there's no opportunity for retail on that entire street, which to me would be a big miss. And in speaking to our current merchants, they would be incredibly upset if that whole street did not have retail on the first floor, because that would limit the stores that people will shop at, and then obviously people will say, why am I going to stay here? I'm going to pick up and go to Armonk or Katona or somewhere else that does have all this retail, and that I can go to more of a one-stop shopping destination. So I think it's a big miss to forego that entire street in retail.
I don't think anyone's advocating for that.
I'm giving my opinion here.
Right,
That
I would agree.
everyone advocated to potentially get rid of retail on the first floor. So
No,
I'm saying, let me
No,
finish speaking,
That's
please.
not what everyone said, though. I just want to make sure the record is clear. That's not what we said.
I
But go
think
ahead.
it is what you said, that you're not going to require retail on the first floor.
No. We said on the east side for the 3-story buildings, but we would want it on the west side for the 4-story buildings.
That's not what I just heard. That Lori just said she'd advocate for having it on
I
both
did
sides.
advocate for that with both
Yeah.
Jeremy and Lauren.
Yeah.
We are
Right, so I'm
discussing
giving
the
my
different points of
opinion.
view, for sure.
Thanks, yeah. So my opinion is that I wouldn't want to get rid of it on the first floor, because I want to maintain the possibility of having actually a very vibrant downtown, which is one of the reasons why, I'm going back to having a code where we're not able to advocate and negotiate with respect to each property. Makes me a little nervous, because it doesn't allow us to do that. And there may be a situation where 4 stories on the side where the train station is makes sense, but we want them to give us retail on the first floor. We want them to give us more affordable housing, and we can't do that as part of a code, because we're not negotiating with them, because as long as they fall within our requirements, they can build whatever they want. It would also give us the opportunity to increase the affordable threshold. But I do like the idea, to Lori's comment, about advocating for some mandatory workforce housing in there, and being able to make each building, instead of a conifer building, make it more like the cupola building, where there is a combination of workforce, affordable, and market rate housing within all of those buildings. Also, I definitely don't want 4 stories on, what is it, the east side, the side across from Susan Lawrence, the east side. I definitely don't want 4 stories there. I think it'll be a problem in terms of 149 King Street view sheds and light to all of those apartment building, to all of those townhouses I mean, honestly, I would rather see 3 everywhere and negotiate for a 4th story with any developer that wants to come in to see if they can give us additional affordable housing or additional needs of our town before we would agree to another story on that side. But I know that's not part of a form-based code, but that's just my view.
Okay. Anyone else have any other comments?
Oh, and just one other quick question. The line that we're talking about, is that going all the way down to Bischoff?
No.
It's stopping. So
What
are
do you
we
mean?
saying we'll allow higher over there?
No, the
it's
2 to 4 covers this entire area that goes off this map.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
It'll be 2 to 3.
Okay, so that's what I was asking. So it'll cover the entire street, not just where the red line is drawn or the orange line. It'll go all the way down.
Correct.
And for clarity, Sabrina, that 2 to 3 now, what's the current zoning in that area? What's the permissible height?
3 stories
Thank you.
or 35 feet.
The orange line are the properties that have a first floor retail requirement
Yeah.
in the
Correct.
draft code.
Correct.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thanks for
Okay. So that's all that I have today. This is an opportunity for the board to open it up to questions.
All right, so then at this point, if you're done, Sabrina, what we'll do now is we'll open up for the public instead of waiting for the town board public comment session. So anyone online, we'll get you after the people who are here in person. So anyone in person wish to step up, please, by all means, just identify yourself when you do so. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Marianne O'Connor. I wanted to jump up because my question relates to the topic you just finished. One of my comments that I had made was with respect to retail on the ground floor. And I guess the threshold question is, that last slide had orange marked, and it was mentioned that retail is required.
That's, if Sabrina can correct, but the orange was denoting where the draft code would require first round.
Okay.
The current draft commercial.
Right,
Correct.
right. And so the first question I have is, does it absolutely require retail, or are there exceptions?
Well,
No.
let me, before we go into that, I just want to be clear and just make sure we're in the right place. We're not discussing the form-based code in terms of what that will be. We're discussing just the adequacy of what was prepared today and presented. So I just want to try to keep us on track.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it is a little
Just
bit,
talk to-
I think it has to relate, if you don't mind.
it does merge a little bit here because we're talking about height and view sheds and those types of impacts, yes. But you're also correct, Jeremy, that there's going to be a public hearing on the form-based code. So the wisdom of some of these aspects of the legislation would be properly raised in the public hearing on that.
So I share that with you just for other people to hear as well. Not that
Right.
the answer, we're going to answer that in probably in a much more depth when it comes to the actual code itself as opposed to just these.
Right, but
Threshold FGIS
that
questions.
discussion would come following finalization of the environmental.
Correct.
Right. So that's why
In
I
fact,
think it
Just
should.
for clarity speaking, the draft code that exists today, that is contained within the environmental review, has a required retail area identified on the map in the orange that is not negotiable.
Right, and so my point is that there's a section in the code that overrides that. So there's a section that says where retail is required in the regulating plan, buildings shall be designed to immediately accommodate retail uses, provided, however, and this is the issue, that other ground floor activating uses may occupy the designated retail space, as long as changes made to accommodate such uses do not prevent a transition back to retail. So the issue for me is, or the question I have is, let's say you have a developer build a building and it's in a required retail zone, but they're permitted to just put a lobby or a storage space or a gym. and it's not something that is enticing to residents in the hamlet. So my question that I had submitted for the public comment was asking for further analysis of the impacts to existing small businesses if non-retail other occupying uses are permitted throughout the town. For example, if you lose Ibiza and Family Britches because they develop and they don't put retail there, what is that going to do to the surrounding businesses? It's giving you fewer reasons to come into the hamlet. So, and if you look at the response to my question, the response basically said, well, first floor retail is required. So, which, one, it's not accurate, and two, it didn't address the analysis that was requested. So that was my point.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hey,
What's,
Sabrina,
can you say where that was, just so I can find you know what page that was?
The comment.
Yeah.
2A-74.
Okay, thank you.
hey, Sabrina, just, when people are giving comments like this, are you taking note of it so we can go back to the consultants? Okay.
Yes, and Bonnie is on the line too, taking notes.
Okay, perfect.
We're both here taking notes, Lisa.
Rob,
Okay.
did you want to get up and say something? Or?
No, I just wanted to move
Oh,
the
okay.
microphone.
All right, whomever's next,
A little bit
please
closer.
join us. Hop up.
Can I just request that people say their names and where they live?
For the record.
Yes. Hi, Ben Herman, 10 North Place. So the first thing I want to speak to is the financial feasibility analysis, which continues to not be accurate, and I'm going to walk you guys through why. The scenarios shown are 4 different scenarios at 3 stories and 4 different scenarios at 4 stories. All 8 scenarios include retail on the ground floor. Okay? The lowest return would be from the 30% of AMI, right? The lowest rent because the poorest people at 3 stories, right? So that's the bottom threshold. So the consultants showed that that scenario generates a profit over 15% and a return on cost of 6.3%. In the DGEIS, they used a threshold of 6%. Meaning 3 stories with retail and the lowest affordable component works at 3 stories. The point Lisa made earlier was they moved the goalposts and changed the return threshold to 6.5 from 6. That's not really an intellectually honest exercise, and it's a disservice to the community because, as I've said to you guys for almost a year now, and I've provided the evidence, 3 stories works. So I'd like to know why the consultants moved that number. Cap rates have actually come down since the DGEIS was done as apartment values have gone up. So if anything, that 6% should either be lowered or stay the same. They've proven that it's not a razor-thin margin. 3 stories works. We see it in Pleasantville, 39 Washington, 101 Washington, buildings with affordable, with retail. 3 stories works. You have a ton of community comments regarding 3 stories. To Lisa's point, if you want to look at something in the future, maybe at a 4th, so be it. But the baseline here needs to be 3 stories. The numbers have proven that I'm right, and I showed you guys this multiple times last year. And again, the numbers from the consultants prove it, they just changed the target, and there's no basis for that to have been done. So that was the first point that I wanted you guys to see and understand, because 3 stories with commercial in the base, with affordable, works. Okay? And apologies for my emotions. You know this is something that is near and dear to my heart. The other point, in addition, if you're not convinced yet, you know, based on those profit hurdles, I would also argue that the rents that they use, both for residential and commercial, are still understated. They used $3.80 per square foot for the new construction. And the data that they shows rents of between $4 and $4.75 for new construction. They use a number of older buildings, which drives it down. That's not really honest exercise either. So again, I think we're getting to a point where the margin for profit at 3 stories is not razor thin above the threshold. It's significantly above the threshold, and that's why you see 3 stories being built in neighboring towns. It works. The commercial rent are also too low. They use $30 per square foot, whereas they show a range of 30 to 45. And that range includes older and newer. Newer at 45, older at 30. So why would you use the bottom end of the range in the analysis? Again, these are all reasons why the profitability model really does work at 3 stories. So that's point number 1. So I'd ask you guys to reconsider the height limitation and keep it at 3 stories.
Ben, when you just
Sure.
curious, I don't know the answer.
Sure.
Some of the 3 stories you were looking at, did they have underground parking? Did they have?
So 39 Washington, I think, has a combination. Now.
So they have 3 stories
Well-
plus underground parking.
Well, let
right?
me answer it, with respect to the numbers, because the consultants did include the cost of parking. And I think you know this. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I closed a loan for a construction of a several hundred unit project on Long Island last month. So I'm obviously happy to engage with you guys, answer any questions. I'm not here to say no to everything. I think you guys know that. I want this to be done within scale and within reason for what works in the community.
Okay,
So the parking garage.
Answer that, like, talk to what you just said.
Well, I don't think it was Bonnie. I think it was Res
Oh,
Group.
yeah.
Res Group, who's not on the phone. I mean, frankly, the evidence is there. I think this is for you guys to decide. Like, the consultants proved that 3 stories works. They just changed the target return and understated rents again. The next point I wanted to talk about was something that I mentioned briefly, and I know this isn't like the last time to speak to this, but there is discussion in what was released related to the bedrooms and the breakdown that's generated. And I know you guys heard this from me about a month ago when I was here. The analysis says that, I think it was developer's choice at 91 Bedford that it'd be 2/3, 2 bedroom and 1/3 1 bedroom, because I had suggested that you guys look at revising those percentages. And in fact, I think those should be, regulated, which is what I mentioned to you guys a month ago, that I think you need to look at a limitation on the percentage of units that can be 2 bedroom, because those are the student generating units. I think the 27% 2 bedrooms that's used is extremely low. I actually pulled some data today of the units in northern Westchester. About 47% are 2 bedroom. And as you see at 91 Bedford, larger units are in demand. So again, I'd ask that you guys look at that and the resulting student projections. There's a statement on page 2A62, and I'm happy I can pause while you guys look at this. It's the displacement section. So that page contains a statement regarding displacement, and it says the proposed action is not anticipated to displace existing residents and or commercial uses. And I appreciate this isn't complete yet, but my comments regarding displacement and higher rents in new construction were not included in this section. Obviously want to see them added, to the extent, they were just missed. In those comments, I reminded the board that the county planner, in her letter to the town, said that the town should consider a displacement plan. So the statement that this plan is not anticipated to displace any existing residents or commercial uses is not a true statement. I see you guys nodding. I think we need to know, A, what are the mitigation measures for that, and is that appropriate? I've obviously been saying since the start we should be focusing on existing vacant properties, not a rezoning of the entire hamlet that will potentially incentivize non-renewal of leases and displacement of store owners and residents. I also just want to let folks know who may not know that there have been a lot of leases signed within the hamlet, and a lot of these within the past 24 months. The Home Store, Grand Lux Realty, Christie's, in fact, GFIT appears about to open on North Greeley itself, the dying street. There's also news that Franny's will be opening a downtown location in the hamlet soon. So I think there are some comments in here that the town is dying. I appreciate, something's gonna be done here, but I think any statement that the town is dying, unless they're gonna say there are fewer leases being signed here than in other towns, which I don't think is the case. I actually think, based on what I see, across the country in terms of retail, there's actually a lot of activity here. may not be, you know, what people perceive as being desired space, but it takes up space and it reduces vacancy. And, you know, the real estate broker who works at Christie's can get lunch at, you know, a store or a restaurant, right? And they're activating uses. So I know people are very picky about it, but there is a lot of stuff going on. The last thing, and I know I see parking on a future agenda, so I'll just, you know, briefly, you know, re-mention that because I did see it in the information that was released. You know, it didn't appear that there were going to be any changes to the parking toolbox from what I read. But I appreciate that may not be conclusive. And obviously, you know, I've spoken to you guys in the past about the reduced parking ratios, stacked hydraulic parking, parking garages, all things that I don't think belong here. I think there are certain sites that have sufficient parking on site. Everyone here needs a car. You know, we should be focusing on places like Rite Aid and, you know, the former Lutheran Church, the Hakeem site. And I think it's dangerous to solve for how will there be development on every site by creating off-site parking, by creating stacked hydraulic parking garages. I mean, that's not normally how it works, you know, in my business. And I think I recall Sabrina mentioned something in one of the earlier work sessions that parking typically constrains development. I mean, that's kind of for a reason because you can't jam everything in together. And the last point I want to make, you know, regarding parking garages being behind buildings, I think that is an issue with regard to a lot of sites in the hamlet because of the topography. Obviously, if you're driving down the King Hill, you're probably going to see the backs of buildings. So I think we need to be very careful with, you know, I obviously don't want to see a parking garage anywhere. I think you all know that. I think you know, it's going to be very difficult for, even if they're behind a building, for them not to be seen. This isn't a flat city, you know, or something like a setback.
I just want to ask one question.
Sure.
Based on your experience, you've developed a lot of properties.
Well, lent to the developers.
So in your experience, how often are you finding 0.1, 0.2 acres with parking structures behind them? And based on your experience where you're developing, where you're loaning to, in our hamlet, there's really no place to put a parking structure but for public land. 0.1 acres, 0.2 acres, who are you accommodating? So I just asked you, so when we hear this parking structure, putting it behind, as Sabrina noted, on a 0.1 acre, you'll get one car in a parking structure, even if it's two. So have you, in your lending, have you lent for parking structures behind 0.1, 0.2 acres and under a quarter acres? And if so, can you provide that data to us so we can see what type of parking structures have been built on 0.25 and 0.2 acres?
Sure, no, that's a great question. You know, most of my business has been larger projects, you know, 10, 15, 20 million and up. So no, I haven't lent against a 0.1 or 0.2 acre. I think, you know, what I would say is, you know, folks should drive into Pleasantville and you can see, you know, like 39 Washington, you know, and you can see some stuff that I don't think fits in here. And, you know, Pleasantville is more spread out, right? So I think you have like at 101 Washington, I think you have 3 or 4 spaces maybe underneath, and then you go behind. You know, but I would encourage you guys to take a look over there because they're not true multi-story garages, which I don't think fit here. So to your point, like you could put a multi-story garage on the Rite Aid site, which I think under the code could be allowed. And for me, that's kind of a big issue. So half acre, I think yes. 1/10 or 2/10 of an acre, I think you're right. You're not putting a parking garage on a site. That's
All right, thank you, Ben.
okay.
as always.
Thanks for hearing me out. I
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Ben. Yeah, 2 points from that I thought were great. I had actually written the same question in my comment about measures to protect displaced residents and displaced businesses.
Okay.
Same exact wording too,
Thank you.
actually, of yours
Okay.
question.
Appreciate it.
And then the other is certainly when we think about the returns for different levels of affordability, appreciating that the metric that we're looking at has the first floor commercial requirement. If we think about relieving that for the east side of the street, then that may give us even more flexibility than we think we have on affordability, AMI.
Right, and I will email you guys, especially the part about the profitability, so you'll have that
Thank you.
for me.
Cool,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you.
Good thing, thank you. You explained it much better than I could have.
Hi, Dora Strauss, 7 Breckenridge Road. I had a question about thresholds, because this is now, I heard it in the last meeting, and now today, it's being, a term that's being used more often than it was before. And the consultant's responses repeatedly refer to thresholds as well, which they state in several sections that the director of planning alone is going to use these thresholds to determine whether particular applications are going to be granted as of right or will require further SEQR review. And then the responses refer specifically to section 6840B7 of the draft form-based code, appendix D, and the GEIS, which is where these thresholds are going to appear. And I know that there were bullet points capturing some of the thresholds. I'm just trying to understand where are these thresholds going to appear? Because I looked at the draft code, that's section 840B7, and there's no listing of thresholds. I don't know what appendix D is, because I haven't, that's obviously maybe not been produced yet. And then the GEIS. Now, the DGEIS is a very long document with a lot of the morass of topics and issues, and there's no specific threshold. So I just want to understand where are these thresholds going to be? Are they going to be listed? So, you know, there's some sort of understanding of how the director of planning alone is going to be applying these thresholds. Are we going to see these published at a certain point, or are we just kind of going off?
So you're at, I
generalities?
think it's Sabrina, if you could clarify that, please. You're on mute.
Certainly. The thresholds are actually written in the draft sections that you have received thus far. So they're there. The intention is that the thresholds will kind of set the standards. They'll be incorporated into the town board's finding statement, and they'll be incorporated into the legislation. Or the information will be incorporated into the checklist that my office will use in reviewing applications.
So when you said that they're in a current draft that's out there now, because I just haven't seen it.
Sections that were provided to the town board at the start of each of the section, there are the thresholds or mitigations listed, yes.
Okay, but the public hasn't seen those.
The documents are not released to the public until they are deemed complete.
Okay.
There has been information distributed as part of the town board's packet of materials, which includes the draft sections that the public can get hold of and review as part of the packet. But those are not, it's not the deemed complete DGE or FGEIS.
Okay, it might be helpful to circulate that. I mean, if it is available and I haven't seen it, then maybe someone can point it out to me, but I hadn't seen it. And I just, hearing about thresholds, I wanted to get a sense of where are they listed? So that was just
For Sabrina, for transparency purposes, why wouldn't we put that out? If we're talking about this anyway publicly, why wouldn't we put that out?
I'm going to defer to Ed to answer that question for you.
It's piecemeal now because the consultant team is working through its draft responses and putting them together and then rolling them out to you to review. In terms of one place where you'd be able to see all of the thresholds, the best place is going to be the finding statement. The back of the finding statement is going to have a compendium of thresholds and mitigation measures that the board will have adopted as part of its statement.
But Ed, if we're asking the public to give comments on this, but we're not giving them all the information so that they can understand what they're giving comments on, that seems odd. Why, is there a reason why we can't make it public?
Only because they're being drafted and revised and reviewed, and when they're ready for the board, they're rolled out for your review, for the public's review. We're not holding anything back.
It seems to me that this is the crux of the legislation. So it's very hard to get a grasp, other than in vague terms, of what we're talking about without seeing the actual thresholds. And I would ask that if the public has a right to comment, that we be able to see those sort of in real time as you guys are.
But they are in the documents. They're at the beginning of each section.
Mhm.
beginning of each section of the responses, or of?
Sure.
Of,
Yeah, this packet.
But Sabrina just said there are things that have not been released to the public.
Well, they're the ones that
Oh,
are
there-
coming
it's
on the
not-
next work session agenda.
Those.
You haven't
They're not
seen
ready
them,
yet.
they're not
Got
done
it,
yet.
got it, got it, got it.
what?
This, in the
It's
packet?
the sections she's talking about, what hasn't been released to the public are the sections that we haven't seen yet, that are still being drafted. We're seeing this like section by section, so I
I
think
just find it really
that's what Ed said
confusing.
Sabrina was just referring to.
Right, so if you look at
The
2A.
entire document has not been prepared. You're seeing bits and pieces as they are completed. Or in draft form, let me clarify that. As I said when I was doing my presentation, it is my expectation before the 9/21 Town Board work session that an entire document of the FGEIS, the introduction, the table of contents, all of the sections and the appendices will be compiled for the board, which will be available at that time for the public.
And then I just had one other sort of global comment. In response to residents' many pleas to keep Chappaqua small, quiet, and uncongested, with low-lying buildings that do not exceed 3 stories, to preserve our views of the hills and trees, to not make traffic and parking worse than it is today, the consultant's only answer really is that there will be no 5-story buildings. I don't consider that to be responsive. The consultants admit that removal of the 5-story option in certain areas of the regulating plan takes the number of apartments down from 997 to 963. This reduction is not material when it comes to residents' concerns about traffic, congestion, building size and height, loss of vistas and views. The major takeaway from the consultants, who outright say that they speak on behalf of the town board, is basically a dismissal of our concerns. The consultants admit that 4-story and new taller 3-story buildings will change the look of Chappaqua, the skyline, and impede views, and that's on pages 2C 3 to 4 and 2C 15. And they basically, it's just a dismissal. They reject it. They reject the concerns. There's no attempt to mitigate adverse effects by going to a 3-story maximum, as many residents requested. It was obvious from the beginning that the 5 stories was kind of a bargaining chip that would have been easily dropped just to say that concerns were addressed. Moreover, the consultants admit that they undertook no serious physical viewshed analysis, and I don't mean just drawing a line on a blurry picture, and with no basis in fact, surmise that it is quote-unquote not likely that views of the hills would be obstructed. That's on page 2C 15. They cannot possibly know this without having conducted true viewshed analysis, which case law does make clear it's commonly undertaken for secret purposes. The consultants, by their own word choice, may likely be wrong. It is extremely disappointing to see complete disregard for our natural setting, which is in fact what makes Chappaqua special. Yes, some buildings in town are old and need refurbishment, but to think that replacing them with a larger scale, sort of fake Victorian, Tudor, Georgian, or other version of unauthentic suburban McMansion-style building is the answer, only to cause the obstruction of the natural views of the surrounding hills and foliage is sad. And I want to know what you guys as board members have to say on this point in particular. And I mean, I know you're going to go back to this notion of what's profitable, 3 versus 4. I think Ben spoke to that. My final point is that I don't think ensuring the developers' profits is really a valid exercise for you guys. You guys are representatives of the residents and not the developers. Lori, when you ran for office, I remember receiving a mailer saying that you don't want a form-based code that would change the character of the town. And when I say character, I mean small-scale buildings and small streets with views of the hills and the skyline, not large-scale apartment buildings and parking structures. And you also said that any decision would have to have community buy-in. So these statements, how do they hold up against these consultant responses, which basically reject the residents' concerns and really don't offer any mitigation other than this meaningless removal of 5 stories when basically 4 stories equates to the same thing. That's all, thanks.
Thank you, Dora.
Can I just comment something really quick, and perhaps Sabrina, correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to make sure that people are crystal clear about the process here. We are required by law to investigate the maximum build-out under seeker review, because hypothetically speaking, saying hypothetically, because we've already heard people loud and clear, hypothetically, if 90% of the town did want 5-story buildings and did want garages, et cetera, people know that it is actually feasible. We didn't use that as a bargaining chip. It was certainly required by law. Seeker, please correct me, Ed, if I'm misquoting.
You're right.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're clearing the perception here that the town board in some way is creating this bargaining chip idea of like, oh, let's just put out 5 and see what happens, and then let's all of a sudden decide, you know what, we're gonna rescind the 5 and go to 4 so that everyone's comfortable. No, that's not how the law works. So I apologize that I'm getting very animated about this, but that perception has been going on for the past 2 years, and it is categorically false.
But Bonnie, I'm sorry, 1 second. To Dora's point, that's like another example of what I was talking about, where there are kind of statements, but it's not backed up by the study. So that's another example of what I was concerned about in terms of completeness.
Okay,
Thanks.
you're talking about the view sheds. Yep.
Well, yeah, it wasn't just that. I mean, you should look through, I'll send examples of more, but I would
Right,
look
okay.
through the whole analysis for all of those instances. Sorry.
Sure. Scott Levine, 149 King Street, although my wife says that we should be on a first name basis now. So I have some prepared remarks, but first, there was an exchange between Councilmember Katz and Bonnie Von Olson about air quality a few minutes ago that I wanted to, it's in my mind. And I think you were basically talking at cross purposes. I think what Lisa is saying is, we want to know, the public has asked, will air quality be worsened? We want to know the answer to that question. And I think, correct me if you think I'm mistaken, Bonnie, I think what your answer is, well, it's not going to exceed some threshold, some either state or federal or whatever threshold. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Sorry, let's find my mute. Yes, but as I said, we'll try to expand on that and provide some additional data.
Sure. So I guess my question to you, Bonnie, I mean, we've heard that you're an expert. We've heard that you've worked on many, many EISs over the years. Have you seen, are there techniques that exist that could provide the answer to the question that Lisa has asked and that the public has asked? Will air quality worsen, and if so, how much?
Yes,
Thank you.
there are, and you know that as well, we're in the consulting business, and I think the air quality is something that deals similarly with thresholds, and there's usually a first screening, when you look at the traffic, and that's really what I'm considering. For a regional basis, it's going to be, are there going to be that many more cars and trucks added to the roads that would affect the air quality? But I'm going to ask internally with folks who are more expert than I in that particular field. But we'll get you some more data.
Sure. So if I'm understanding correctly, techniques exist, but we've chosen not to do them.
I don't think it's not a cross-examine. We asked her a question, Bonnie said that she's gonna look into it, but we don't have to keep on going back
But
and
it
forth.
is, to my point, more of a global issue on this document, that I felt like there are many questions that aren't answering the questions. It's just giving kind of summary statements without the backup for those statements.
Great.
Sorry.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so at the last town board work session, I think it was August 10th, Councilmember Morton discussed protecting one's investment. It was the town's investment she was talking about. My comment is going to pick up on that theme. And also the discussion that we've just had about 149 King and visual impacts and who is impacted. As I think you guys know, I think you're all well aware, there's a lot of real apprehension among my neighbors in the 149 King Street townhomes that the form-based code as proposed would have as yet undisclosed and as yet unmitigated adverse impacts, and by impacting the quality of life would ultimately diminish the monetary value of the individual townhomes. All of the townhomes have living space very near to the rear or side of surrounding properties that would be incentivized to redevelop at much larger scale with 0 feet side and rear setback requirements and no side or rear design standards. I understand that as legislators, you must balance your goals against the adverse local impacts that's inherent in any serious change to land use policy in an already built-up area. Nevertheless, I imagine that you can sympathize with the desire that my neighbors living in the 149 King Street complex have. The wish to have a magic wand that they could wave to make the form-based code not diminish the value of their townhome. I think any reasonable person in their position would wish to have such a magic wand.
Mr. Levine, I'd just like you to stay focused. And if you have an issue with what is being presented to you about the sufficiency of it, I understand your position about 149 King Street.
I'm reading my comments.
So if you can just please try to stay on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you. It picks up on the themes that we discussed tonight. No one in the 149 King Street complex has a magic wand that can prevent a decline in their property value from the actions that you're now contemplating. No one except for one townhome owner who's a town board member. Councilmember Levin owns
Excuse
townhome number
me.
16
Excuse
as
me.
an investment
Okay.
This is
property.
beyond.
this. No,
this
I
is
need to
beyond
respond to this.
Excuse me.
inappropriate.
No, you
I
are out
haven't
of line.
finished- I haven't
Mr.
finished
No,
Levine.
no, Mr. Levine.
You are out of
I have
line,
not
and I've
finished my
answered
comment.
this
I have not
multiple
finished my comment.
times,
You're
and the
interrupting
fact
me.
that people
With respect, you're interrupting
constantly
me.
question my integrity and my work
With
on the town
respect,
board
I have not questioned your
is
integrity.
incredibly out of line. And I'm not gonna stand here for it, and I'm not gonna listen to it,
Then
because
leave. I'm
I've
asking-
already proven that I'm not here to reduce property values at 149 King. I'm not here to make sure that your house goes under, or whatever the case may be that you believe.
Why did
I've
you- why
written
are you
to many
interrupting me?
folks at 149 King, and I've confirmed that, and I
Why
cannot
did you
believe
interrupt me?
that you have the audacity to come in here and put me on the spot like that with no evidence whatsoever.
You interrupted
Mr.
me.
Mr. Levine, I'm going to ask you to ask a question related to this topic, or I'm going to ask you to sit down. That is absolutely irrelevant. So
Interrupted me in the
ask your
middle of a
question, or I'm
comment.
going to ask you to sit down. So what is your question?
I'll continue.
What is your question, sir?
Under the first draft of the form-based code, Councilmember Levin's townhome
Okay,
was
all right,
blighted.
that's enough. This has nothing to do with her townhome. There's nothing to do, what is your question?
We're talking about the
No.
visual impacts to 149 King. That's
Okay, so
just
what
the
does that have to
discussion
do
you
with
had.
her home? What is the question about the
Please stop
impact?
interrupting me.
No, Mr. Levine, you're inappropriate and out of line.
Under the first draft of the form-based code, Councilmember Levin's townhome was slated to be blighted by a
Mr.
50-plus
Levine, all right,
foot tall building wall
Ed, what do I
on
do?
its
Because this is
northern
out of
property
line. This is
located very
inappropriate. Ed.
approximately 5 feet from the
Ed.
rear deck and 15 feet
Yeah,
from the
I'm
living
gonna
room
ask for a break,
and
please, because this is
master bedroom
inappropriate. It's
windows
just, it's out of line.
Councilmember Levin's
So,
townhome.
Carrie,
I
would have
will
boxed
answer
it
your
in.
questions,
we're gonna take a
but I
recess.
really want to take
Access
a
to
break
sunlight.
because this is absolutely out of line.
Diminishing
And
its
I'm
value
not gonna,
considerably.
I'm not gonna stoop to your level. I'm not, because I've already answered these questions multiple times.
haven't
And I
made
will
my
read you an
comment and
email
you've
that I sent
interrupted.
to the President Association, but we are gonna
You
take a
keep
break because I
you
need
keep
to cool off
interrupting me.
before I
All
need
right,
to
we'll take a
respond to your
recess. Thank you.
question.
With respect, you
Thank
keep
you.
interrupting me.
We're going to start back up again. All right, Mr. Levine, you can come up. Please stay to what, oh, I'm sorry, hold on. Are we recording now? Okay, thank you. Mr. Levine.
I'm going to finish my
Hold on,
comment.
I'm going to
I'll
finish
do it
talking,
very
Mr. Levine, I'm going to
Do you
speak
wanna
and
make
then
sure
give an
Bonnie's
opportunity to be
back,
heard.
Jeremy?
What's that?
Do you wanna make sure Bonnie's back?
Oh, is Bonnie there?
Yes,
she
I'm
is.
here.
All right, super, thank you. Mr. Levine.
Thank you.
Ask your substantive question as to what is being presented today. We're not required or secretive to give this opportunity, but we certainly are, and we want to continue it. That's the whole reason why we're doing this. It's not an obligation, but we're doing it and we increase the number of engagements. It's not a back and forth. That's not what the purpose of this is. So if you're going to speak about allegations, which you are, about someone who may be doing something improper, which isn't happening, I remind you that don't be your worst enemy and try to advocate for something that you want, because ultimately, a person speaks, I turn it off to listen to people make baseless, hurtful, inappropriate comments. That doesn't mean it's to everybody, but I'm talking about you specifically. You're not doing yourself any favors. That being said, speak in substance of what your issue is, and we are happy to address it in an appropriate manner. So go ahead, sir.
You are more than welcome to shut yourself off, and there doesn't need to be a back and forth. I'm just going to read my remarks. Under the first draft of the form-based code, Councilmember Levin's townhome was slated to be blighted by a 50-plus foot tall building wall on its northern property line, located very approximately 5 feet from the rear deck and 15 feet from the dining room and master bedrooms. It would have boxed it in, blocking its access to sunlight, etc., and diminishing its value considerably. Decisions on the form-based code by the town board majority have now become very site-specific, very detailed, as we've heard tonight, with these decisions now impacting different properties within and near the proposed form-based district intimately and in highly differentiated ways. For instance, there's now the suggestion of perhaps limiting zoning changes to the so-called North Greeley corridor, which would blight some townhomes within the 149 King Street complex, but not others. It would not blight townhome number 16, which is Councilmember Levin's investment property. The relevant authorities make clear that the actions of legislators must be above reproach, both in fact and in appearance. My neighbors are wondering why the town board majority thinks it's okay for their townhomes to be blighted by this action, but not for the similarly situated townhome owned by Councilmember Levin. She stated in the weeks before removing the possibility of her investment property being blighted, quote, "The new development is directly behind those homes, and I can see how that would certainly decrease the quality of life," end quote. All of my neighbors wish that they had the magic wand that Councilmember Levin has to let them also avoid these harmful impacts. Pandora's box has now been opened by the town board majority now making these site-specific decisions which supersede the earlier general hamlet-wide decisions and create big new winners and big new losers among owners of individual hamlet properties, including investment properties owned by town board members. It's critical that the public have absolute and full confidence that decisions are being made solely in the public interest, and even an appearance of favored treatment, even if you tell the public that your intent is solid gold, calls into question the integrity of the entire decision-making process. This is a very, very difficult situation. I'll close by requesting that Councilmember Levin please recuse herself from further discussion and decision-making on the form-based code project. This is not in any way personal. It's not. It's about good public policy. In our town, there is direct precedent for board members recusing themselves over interests that are much less direct. Thank you very much for your consideration. I'm praying for wisdom for all of you. Councilmember Levin, will you agree to recuse yourself?
So I'd first like to apologize for my behavior earlier. I think that I was very emotional, and I apologize for acting out and yelling and screaming. I don't think that that's appropriate, and I certainly don't think that it's professional. So I hope that the folks in the audience, including Scott, take my apology. I would like to read an email that John Priscatelli had sent me a few months back. Hi John, I thought it might be helpful to reach out directly given your note. Understanding the frustration and your concerns being unresolved, Your questions are under the scope of our consultants, and functionally, they could not respond until the public hearing closed on March 25th. That said, if your question is about the 4-story maximum on the east side of North Greeley, where the old Opportunity Shop and the prior William Ravis office existed, I believe the current plan is to maintain its current form. On the conflict of interest, removing my being slightly offended at the implication and hardly veiled insult, the question was answered several times, and it is outlined here, and I can forward this email to you, Scott. The situation you are highlighting just does not qualify, and at the risk of sounding defensive, every time someone accuses me or someone else of something inappropriate or self-enriching, the obligation does not automatically run to spending huge amounts of time defending a baseless claim. There should be some burden on the accuser to look at the actual rules, which are public and crystal clear. That said, since you seem intent on thinking or saying that I'm working on the form-based code to help myself financially, I will reject it, full stop. It could not be further from the truth. My role as a town board member and as an owner of 149 King is completely separate from the form-based code. We purchased the property before I became a board member, hoping that our family would live close to us. We have twice improved the property and had either family or wonderful tenants live in the unit, and all that should increase the values of other units over time. I ran for town council because I enjoyed my work on the Chamber of Commerce and hope my work with the downtown merchants could be helpful. I've spent a fair bit of volunteer time trying to help the town, and I'm honestly proud of my track record before and during my town board membership helping the hamlet. I hope and think that if you ask any merchant in the hamlet, they would say that I'm a strong partner and that I work hard to create events to drive traffic and activity downtown. This should and all will help increase property value broadly. I get being a public official opens you to accusations, and they are of folks, but I will say it is never fun and never feels fair. I've spent 100+ hours on the form-based code, researching towns that currently have one or are pursuing one, and deeply believe revising a 70-year-old zoning code would increase vitality in the hamlet and increase property values. Statistically, towns with strong main streets, diverse housing options, and more feet on the street increase property values for all homeowners. However, I'm also laser focused on balanced and meaningful growth and get that there are trade-offs. If you attended all 6 public hearings, you would have heard me specifically state protocols and ways to revise the current code to prevent this. Thank you.
Whether or not there's a conflict of interest that requires
Okay,
recusal
I
does
think
not
we're done
depend
here.
on how
I'm
hard
gonna
you've
limit,
worked on
I'm
the
gonna limit
project.
public hearing, so at
Depends on
9:15,
whether
we're
the
gonna be done, so if you wanna
conflict
take,
of
continue to
interest
take
is
time from your
direct
people,
and
your friends,
substantial.
and those who
And
should ask
by
and wanna ask
changing
reasonable
the
questions,
project
keep on
To the
continuing.
North Greeley corridor, your interest has become more direct and more substantial. Thank you.
Severino.
If I may, just so the public is aware, if anyone hasn't seen this yet, we addressed this, my office addressed this with an opinion. The opinion's been turned into a frequently asked question that's on the town website under the landing page for Chappaqua Forward. We've determined that there's no conflict of interest. The analysis is set forth in that frequently asked question for everyone to read.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Ray Sanseverino, 65 Carolyn Place, Chappaqua, New York. Whether or not there's a conflict of interest, in 1979, the Appellate Division, 2nd Department, announced what's become known as the tuxedo doctrine, which is the test to be applied is not whether there's a conflict, but whether there might be. It is the policy of the law to keep the official so far from temptation, and I'm quoting from the case, as to ensure his unselfish devotion to the public interest. An appearance of impropriety results when an officer's personal situation may affect the public's perception of his or her ability to act impartially and in the best interest of the taxpayers as a whole. And the Attorney General advises officers to recuse themselves where an appearance of impropriety arises. So it's not just a conflict, and I don't know whether there is or is not, but it's the appearance of impropriety. And what the request is that you recuse yourself.
Thank you. Do you have a question about
No,
the
I'm just
materials?
stating
Because I
done.
mean, if that's the tack, that you're that desperate because you don't have the substance that you're going to attack somebody up here
No, I'm not
for
attacking
doing her
anyone.
job
I'm
and
not
accusing
attacking
her
anyone.
or insinuating
I'm not
that she's
attacking
unethical.
anyone.
No,
I
you
am just
certainly
telling
are,
you
sir.
what the
And it's a
doctrine is.
pretty sad state of
Well,
affairs. and that's
counsel
what it
said-
comes down to.
counsel
he's-
said that there's no
if you want to
conflict.
send
I'm
a
telling you
memo,
that's not
by
the
all
test.
means do so. But it's pathetic and sad that you're going to attack somebody for
I'm not
doing her
attacking
job.
anybody.
Yes, you are. It's pathetic
I'm
and sad that
telling
my
you-
voice is raised. I'm not like Lauren, who's being very nice and saying she's apologizing. You're out of line. You're out of
Not out of
line.
line.
Our counsel already did something.
I'm not out of line.
already-
Why am I? I'm telling you what the doctrine is. Counsel
you're-
says there's no conflict. I'm correcting counsel. That's it.
Okay, I hope that we can return to comments on the completeness of the DGEIS, especially if we are intending to cease the public comment this evening at 9:15.
Mr. Klepper, by all means.
Do I still have to introduce myself?
Unfortunately, I think you do, just for the record.
Roger Klepper, Pond Hill Road. Just going through a couple of things that have been said tonight. First of all, I can understand why, there might have been some offense to Dora's comment about, kind of putting the 5 stories as kind of as a compromise, as a negotiating tactic. But the response to that, saying that they were required under SECRA to assess the 5 stories. You do all realize that that's just patently not correct. It's the 5 stories is a choice you make at the very beginning. Like if you had chosen 4 stories at the very beginning, so then SECRA would have required you to assess 4 stories, right? There's no requirement to choose 5 stories at the very outset. In fact, I've said several times that choosing 5 stories at the outset could have been dismissed out of hand.
So I'm going to just get to the point.
So,
They weren't
so it's
here.
incorrect, right?
So they weren't here because they weren't in the beginning. Lisa was deputy, I was here. Lisa, I speak for myself, and I'm sure you agree. Were we using that as when 5 stories was examined, was that a bargaining chip? And if so, did you approve it as such?
Jeremy, that's not what all I'm
So-
saying is that I understand, but the response was it. You agree the response was incorrect?
I'm not agreeing to anything other than if
Do you
have
agree
a
the
question-
response was
I'm not-
incorrect?
it's not
Can
a
we have a real
cross-examination.
conversation?
No, you can address the issues that we're dealing with here.
The response was
So
incorrect.
the questions are, how do you think this is adequate or not? Not whether or not you agree with Lauren's response. So that's your question. If you have one, by all means, ask it.
Okay. The implication in the comment was, perhaps elements of bias in the process, right? That's sort of a different way of saying it, maybe less offensive, right? So my question is, now we get to Ben's comments, right? So, he's a real estate professional, I'm not, but if that's real, that $30 was an assumption and it really should have been 45, and this gets to the point of bias, right? No, the real estate consultant is not here. But where are they getting this directive from? Why would they be so wrong in the same direction on every assumption? You want us to engage with you in a manner of goodwill, right? But this is an ongoing thing that Ben has been pointing out for months. And how is it that the right number, does this bother you at all? We have the consultant on the line. Who's interacting with these real estate consultants? Where are they getting the directives? Why is this happening? Does that bother you? Are you concerned by that at all? So when we say it seems like this is being steered in a certain direction, the implication, I know, that the 5 stories, yes, it all paints a certain picture. But these things happen, and we see these things, and, yes, we would like to have a real conversation. A real conversation, apparently, would be rents of $45, would be a cost return of 6%, of whatever the metrics were that he was giving. Why are we off by so much? I mean, we have the consultants on the line. I mean, we don't need the real estate consultants. Who's giving them their directives? It seems to me as if this is what something looks like when a consultant is hired to come up with a certain answer. This is what that looks like. And convince me that that's not what's happening here.
Well, for me, personally, I did not interact with the consultants. They provided all this output and we read it. I can't speak for everybody else on the town board. But essentially, I think what they were trying to do was look at the historical data of the town of Chappaqua and why hasn't anything been redeveloped in the past 30 years. So perhaps they were saying, okay, there's this thought process that 45 per square foot in rental units or whatever is too high. So maybe that's why they use $30. I don't know. But I will tell you as a town board member that I certainly have not steered that conversation in a way so that we do end up with 4 stories on the Rite Aid property. I want to know what the actual data is, and that's why we're going through this exercise.
We just want a real conversation.
Well, that,
We
I'm
just
giving you a
want-
real conversation.
No,
Is that sufficient? I hope that was sufficient.
No, I understand that, but like, so as we keep seeing these things come up, and it makes it feel very adversarial when, you know, we're making these comments about things, yet at this point in the process, things are coming out that are so far off. Why is, I mean, do you have any idea why that's happening?
I think what we're talking about here is a difference of opinion in the analysis that the consultant has delivered versus what Ben is offering based on his own analysis.
According to Ben,
I'm sorry, did you want me to comment?
I'm sorry.
Did you want me to?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
So we may be misaligned. There's a reason actually that the town board is meant to assess this and that it doesn't go into an endless loop of back and forth dissatisfaction in public comment infinity. I'm actually looking forward to Ben's written comment. I would like to read it and I would like it to inform questions that I have back for the consultants, and I think I gave him some of that feedback when he was done speaking. So there's going to be there may be different ways of answering the questions, and we have answers that have been given by our consultants, and I'm reading them, and they will inform my opinion. Information that I've gathered from 2 years of talking about this is informing my opinion on the legislation.
Roger, I don't know when you came here, but the first question I actually asked was that I felt in reading this that a lot of the answers were trying to solve for a hypothesis and take the data and meld it to that rather than taking data and coming up with a new hypothesis or taking objective data. And I do happen to share those same concerns, and I did say those at the very beginning to Sabrina and Bonnie, that I was concerned that goalposts had been moved, and to me, I actually agree with that I am concerned that some of the data is not potentially as objective as it should be and is being answered to solve for something rather than to give objective data and decide where we should move on from there. So we are looking at that, and Bonnie has definitely said that she will be looking at her answers and providing more appropriate analysis.
And I would also encourage, as the process continues, let's you know, there should be some, if Ben's comment, you know, when you look at it, I mean, being off 30 versus 45, that's a 50% increase in revenue. I mean, being off by that magnitude, that has to concern us in terms of why did they think that was appropriate? Like, really, we have to ask those questions. It is your duty in terms of diligence on this
So
project.
she's going to follow up, and you should know, I don't know anybody here who's directed anybody on this group, body, to do anything other than do their due diligence. Not once that I'm aware of anyone. I'll speak for myself, certainly, said, can you fit a square peg in a round hole and get to the 4 stories somehow, some way? I assure you That never happened with me, and I'm overwhelmingly confident it never happened with anybody else from when this started until now. So you should walk out of here whether or not you like the answer, which I understand because there's a difference of opinion. We want to have Bonnie examine it more, which she said she will, or the res group will as well. But nobody directed on this town board anyone to do anything to make it work.
Okay. I have one last comment, and this will be very quick, I promise. I had mentioned the legal risk, from having a finding statement for the entire area when we're just implementing on a smaller area. What I'd like to know, I think it's a scale of 10 to 1. Is there any precedent that we have where the findings is literally 10 times the size of what actually gets implemented? And I think it would be interesting to know, because we talk about if there's any legal exposure, I'd like to know if there's any precedent that we know of where there's such a big mismatch. And I said last time, for no good reason, but that's another topic. But in terms of if there is a precedent, what were the motivations and just those examples.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Dan Soloway, 17 Crossways. It's been quite a lively evening and I don't plan to add to that. Just for information, as you know, I've been looking for space in town, so I can tell you as a non-consultant that the rents being offered for first floor commercial space have been quoted largely at $45 a square foot in the hamlet, and at Chappaqua Crossing, 54. That's non-consultative, it is non-arguable. These things are listed and posted with agents. So I just wanted you to know that. My question or questions are about the stakeholders in town and how we're looking at the pros and the cons for all the groups. Not limited to, but including current residents, future residents, merchants, the building owners, the school districts. Because I hear a lot of chat about the study and the consultant's findings and what you all believe, but I'm not really hearing how we're applying all of this to all of the stakeholders. And the reason I'm saying that is it seems to be we're worried about affordability or financial aspect as it relates to making it feasible for a developer. Terrific. There's no guarantee in profits in our capitalism as it exists, right? But we miss out on, we'll look at the property owners in a tranche over here, like this deal has to happen and it has to be profitable. And I get that. But we're not looking at or saying, but what's making the businesses in town profitable, right? So at a 30% down payment, a typical loan to value ratio of a commercial property, if I wanted to buy a $1.2 million building in town, it would cost me $360,000 plus some associated costs. If I want to open up a restaurant in that building that's owned by somebody else, it may be $500,000. And I have over 20 years of restaurant experience. So those are real numbers. I'm talking working capital all the way down. But we're valuing owning a building and saying that that has to be feasible. But we're not valuing our merchants. We're not valuing that group. I haven't heard anybody say, what's going to happen with the tenants, the non-residential tenants? And it doesn't have to be restaurants. Look at all the thriving businesses we have. Hip Kids, Scattered Books, a load of salons that I don't go to. So I want everything to benefit everyone. And way back when I first spoke, I'm going to say it was over the winter, I don't remember. We've been in a pandemic. Every day is like Friday or Sunday. You either have something to do tomorrow or you don't. I said, at the time Ivy was a supervisor, I said, progress is not good enough alone. It has to be positive progress. And so what I want to see is not everybody get left out. So my question to not be answered, but to just be heard is, how are we helping all of the stakeholders? Why are we only focusing on the feasibility for financial success for owners or developers. That's the crux of where I'm at. The third question is, when we talk about the maximum build-out, everybody is concerned. Most of the people behind me are concerned. It's been raised by you all. But I look at it in a common sense way, because I have kids, and I say to myself, if I wanted my children to come home by midnight, I wouldn't make their curfew 2 a.m. and hope that they got in by midnight. I would say,
My interrupt is for the purpose
Yeah.
of time. Can you get to, what is your ultimate question?
my ultimate question is, why do we keep talking about maximum build out? It's like the elephant in the room, but not just reeling it in. Why don't we just reel in the max build out? Or at least consider the reeling in of the max build out, because it seems that every time it's brought up, there's no specific answer from your side. And maybe it's because it's going to come by September 21st. But where are we on that? Like, everybody has trepidation. Nobody wants to see it. It's always a, if we get there. If we don't want it when we get there, then don't have it today. That's what I'm talking about. Like, I appreciate all 4 of your involvement. I've seen and heard when I was on Zooms, it's been difficult. And you get personally attacked, and you have full-time jobs and families. So I value it. But I'm not getting the answers, and some people alluded to the fact that it kind of seems a little bit odd and perception is off. And it's true. I think from a resident standpoint, it's kind of true. But I value you, and so I'm asking open-endedly, these 3 points, where are we on that? Let's answer those. I mean, they're not the nitty-gritty from the studies, but I think if we answer those questions, the nitty-gritty from the study starts to come into focus. Because right now we're all over the place. We're trying to prove a study, but we haven't really answered the questions of why and what's the benefit. That's where I'm at. Thanks.
Hi, Warren Gottlieb, 8 Plymouth Road. I promise this is a low drama presentation. I've read the draft FGIS pages that were released, I guess, right before the August 10th meeting, and I've also read the latest ones, and along with Appendix H. And of course, we're still waiting for a lot of other materials. But I just do want to say at the outset, and I did write this down before I came here, so I'm not responding to anything that's occurred in the room tonight. But I do know that, regardless of any of the policy difference that I've had with any of you over the years, and I think I probably have with every single one of you at some point, and there have also been agreements too, but I do respect the office that you hold and the service to our community. And I also respect that each of you are experienced professionals in your own right, in your various disciplines, outside of your respective roles on the town board. And although I don't speak for anybody but myself, I suspect that there are others that share my viewpoint, and that similar respect for each of you and the role that you have and the work that you've put in. And I say that, and in no way to diminish that, but that respect is genuine. It is genuine. But respect is also a two-way street, and I think that's kind of what we're feeling in this room a little bit. And I felt it when reading. It kind of just occurred to me when I was reading the FGEIS, and I'm going to get to what my very specific points in there, because I was disappointed with the document because portions of the document are, in my opinion, they're incomplete. In my opinion, they have inaccurate and misleading statements. There's some circular reasoning. I think some things, in my opinion, are intellectually dishonest. And there seems to be, I'm seeing also this result-oriented approach, and not really, what seeker really should be is the hard look. And it almost comes across in total as there's like an undercurrent of, and I'm not suggesting this is intentional, I know it's not, but it comes across to a reader, a resident, like there's an undercurrent of almost contempt for residents at this point. And maybe after listening, for this much time, you're kind of sick of us. I don't know what it is, but it feels like, I'm not saying that you are.
There's no contempt, only
Okay.
other than when there's personal attacks.
I'm just saying the document, not
ultimately,
you.
what is
Jeremy,
your
not
question?
you. I didn't say it was you. I didn't. And, when it's you, I tell you it's you. I didn't say it was you.
Maybe next time.
Okay, maybe next time. Okay, I told you, this is very low drama. I also wanted to say, before I go into a few illustrative examples, and I'll speed this along because we're already at 9:15, that this town board has always, and I would not say always, but routinely, with great fanfare, opted to implement policies and procedures that go beyond the bare minimum of what state or other political subdivisions require, using those requirements as a floor and not a ceiling. And I mention this because throughout the seeker process, and including in this document, which I'm going to go through a few specific examples, when residents have made process or substantive requests, those requests are often denied or dismissed as asking for something that the town board as lead agency is not required to do under seeker. And that I really think is a mindset that going forward through this, because we're going to be at this, I suspect, for quite some time, I say to our town board, our town planner, town council, town administrator, that when we're dealing with something this important, I think we really have to not apply a sort of what is the bare minimum approach, okay? Because I think that because I feel that in reading this document, and I think that that's contributing to, and I'm not suggesting it's intentional, I'm just telling you that it's coming across that way, and I think it's creating a much more difficult environment for all of you and for the community than there really needs to be. So with that, for illustrative purposes, I just have 3 or 4 things from the document itself I want to go through. I also, just as a general comment, again, I recognize all of you are accomplished in your own right with outside of this building in your own careers. I'm a little uncomfortable with, I think there's a lot of reliance on town planner and consultant, and I do think we should be looking to the planning board and other interested agencies a bit more. I just think the locus of that is just, let's get some diversity in there. Okay, so here we go. All right, so for illustrative, and by no means exhaustive purposes, because we would definitely be here a long time, here are some of the issues that I'm talking about. One of them, Lori, you referenced, which is response A3, which response A3 doesn't really respond to the predicate. I mean, that comment asked the lead agency to identify which of the 44 goals in the comp plan are deemed to have been materially furthered by the proposed action, and specifically, because this was my comment. Okay, right, okay. I wanted the data points and analysis that lead to that conclusion, because we should have some way of just, how do we get there? So we need to do that. The second, and there are a lot of just conclusory statements in there. I think that needs to be looked, because that's a real big one, because that's what the whole purpose of this is to implement the comprehensive plan. I get that. And goal number 9 was left out completely out of all the 44, because they did go through, and that one is traffic, and that actually I think is a big one, because at the key choke points, it's like a 39% increase. So that's a big deal. All right, so that's that one. Next one is response B82. B82 asks in part, comment B82, that illustrative examples be given of Westchester County municipalities that are similarly situated to Newcastle, where a form-based code has been implemented. It asks for the impact, and it asks for the impact for each of the subject areas from sections 3A through 3K of the DGEIS. Now, in the response to that, we're given some towns who are looking at FBCs, we're given some towns where they have FBCs like Portchester, New Rochelle, Yonkers, but we're not really given ones that are similarly situated in Westchester. If there are none, we should just say that. But I don't see any there, so I think we just got to get the response to that one way or the other, because that's something I really want to understand a little bit better. And then just 2 more. B93. B93 was asked the following. The comment asked the following. Please identify any and all specific data points from the purported public engagement process from 2014 through and including September 25th, 2020, that specifically articulate public opinion supporting the concept of a form-based code approach to zoning in the study area defined in the DGEIS. That question is not answered. It's just basically it evades the question, and it doesn't even point the reader to the underlying 2014 data set, because there actually is underlying raw data to that, because I've looked at it. And so if there's something other than that, great, let us know. If that's what it is, I just don't see it in there. And the last one is this, and then I'll wish you all a good evening. Comment 94, that comment challenges and rejects the notion that the form-based code rejects what the community wants for the study area. And the response to that comment was just basically comment noted. And like a circular referral to a myriad of other responses and, conclusory statements and circular reasoning. And listen, I'm an attorney. I do read and answer interrogatories. And it reads like interrogatories for somebody who doesn't want to answer the question. And that's how it comes across. So in closing, I know we're going to continue plowing ahead with this. I think you've heard some very good comments here tonight. I really think let's not make the timetable decide all here. Let's try and talk to each other a little bit more, because I think otherwise there's just going to be more of this. Let's continue having these discussions and tearing this apart together. Thanks.
All right, I said 9:15. Any other question? I'll give one more chance. I don't want to do anything, say anything.
Jeremy, we have someone with their hand raised.
Okay.
Okay, Ed Frank, you just need to introduce yourself.
Good evening.
Hi, Ed.
So, whether or not the consultant's answers that were given were adequate, as any scientist knows, if the data used in an analysis is incorrect, the results of the analysis will not be correct. That brings us back to the troublesome lack of charrette at the start of a form-based code process, meeting with planners, having discussions, and very difficult during this worldwide pandemic. So as a result, the DGIS and the comments that have come back from the consultants contain incorrect conclusions and incorrect answers to public comments. For example, one response that came back is that, as described in FGEIS Chapter 18, completion of the SECRA process is legally required step before any zoning changes can be enacted by the town board. For that reason alone, the SECRA process that the town board started in January 2020 must continue and be completed. Well, I disagree with that, and I have a solution. You stop the current SECRA process, that's the end of it, and you continue and restart the SECRA process based only on the North Greeley Avenue section. Simple. So if there's a legal reason why that can't be done, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, I think that's what should be done. In reference to another comment that came back to me, overlay zoning is not contemplated at this time and not what the town board chose to study in the DGIS for the revitalization of the Chappaqua Hamlet. Well, I sent you all a copy of the Beacon revitalization that was done without a form-based code. And it is a now very, very vibrant city. No form-based code required. I asked about the changing needs of the community, explain what the needs of the community are changing, citing specific and detailed examples. The answer that came back was changing needs of the community can mean many things, but there was nothing in the answer specific to Chappaqua. So again, the answers that are given are not adequate. Another thing, the intent of the form-based code is to have parking lots, garages designed such that their visual impacts are minimized. That's the important word, minimized, and located behind buildings. Well, I have compassion for the people who live in these areas that are under consideration, and they could have a parking lot. There could be 2 lots bought up, meeting the appropriate size to put up a building, and there could be a parking garage behind it, even if it's only 2 stories higher. I would feel bad for a family who saved up all their money to buy a home, living here, and the next thing you know, there's a parking garage next to them.
Mr. Frank, let me interrupt for 1 second, I apologize, but we all have empathy, and despite what some may think, but I just ask that this is not about empathy for people in terms of the questions you're asking. It's not about whether you like a parking structure or not. It's assumed we all have empathy for people. The question is, can you please just ask as to
Okay, Jeremy, let me
Thank you,
continue.
thank you.
I got it, Jeremy, let me continue.
Thank you.
The plan, so another comment, plan also identified the need for the community to diversify its housing type from a single-family community to one that offers more options for our younger and older adults. Please explain how this statement was developed. Well, here's what came back to me. Undertaking market studies and/or demographic surveys to ferret out this level of detail were outside the scope of the EIS process. That's hardly an answer. That's very poor. Then, as far as selling town-owned land, the question that I put out to public comments, and what came back is that if the town ever considered the alienation of public property in furtherance of a particular development project, separate discussions and public hearings would be required. There would need to be many legal steps. And the legal steps, I think you know, you're an attorney, would be a permissive referendum. That is all on the backs of the citizens, the residents, and the taxpayers that live in this town. That's not an answer. Next comment, that the reasonable development in this case refers to the full build-out of form-based code separating public-owned land, description of a potential build-out with a reasonable development in the entire hamlet. Please describe exactly the definition of reasonable development. And the answer that came back from the consultants or whoever, reasonable development in this case refers to the build-out scenario, which is based upon input from the downtown working group. There's the problem. The downtown working group did not consist of residents, citizens, taxpayers. There was no charrette. That is not an answer. And then, finally, explain the definition of healthy living for seniors living in the Chappaqua downtown hamlet when compared to seniors living in their homes. Explain the definition of active lifestyles for seniors. And here's the consultant's answer. Healthy living in the downtown and pursuing active lifestyles in this complex simply refers to a more walkable environment. Well, let's stop right there. Downtown Chappaqua is not a walkable environment. Go to Pleasantville, go to Mount Kisco. You could walk for many blocks and a long time. You can't do that here. And seniors, especially older ones, are not walking up King Street. And with open spaces, talking about open spaces, people that live in their own home or a condominium, they could go out in their backyard, their deck, their patio, and look at open spaces. What open spaces is somebody going to be looking at living in an apartment on Greeley Avenue? So I'm asking a whole bunch of questions. I'm not getting proper answers. And the worst of it all, expecting seniors or even anybody living in an apartment in a town without on-site parking is not healthy for seniors. And as you might know, what it says in the DGIS is that parking can be a quarter of a mile away. Well, if I was living in New York City and I was looking for an apartment, I wouldn't move into an apartment as a senior where my parking is 5 blocks away.
I get it,
Sure,
Mr. Frank.
hey, let me finish. And I sure would not be moving to an apartment where the parking lot is a mile away. Thank you, Jeremy, for listening. Have a good night and stay safe.
Any other hands raised?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Okay, so Ed, in terms of adjourning this right now, what's the next step?
Sabrina had a slide on this, but just briefly, you've got a work session scheduled for September 14th, during which we hope to have the remaining sections before the town board, and then or shortly after, it'll be a binder of all the sections combined in one place. And I think that'll make the ease of reference, it'll help with that. Then you've got 2 more sessions. You've got September 21 on the schedule, and then September 23, which is a Thursday.
Okay. All right, so now we have a bunch of administrative items.
Okay, quite a few administrative items tonight. I'll run through them, just stop if you want any further clarification. First, we have the payment of claims. The next 4 are resolutions accepting maintenance and cash bonds. The first couple are for Campfire Road, 230 Campfire Road, the Campfire Club. There's tree replacement, stormwater management, and wetland buffer enhancement. 91 Bedford Road is tree replacement and wetland mitigation. Chappaqua Crossing Retail, the stormwater management, tree preservation, and wetland buffer. And also Chappaqua Crossing Retail, the maintenance bonds for the tree removal and remediation of stormwater on 117 right away. Next, we have authorization to provide a fire hydrant to Chappaqua Crossing. There was a hydrant that is operational, but I think it gets stuck, so the town is agreeing to provide a hydrant to Chappaqua Crossing. They'll install it. The next 2 are authorizations to award land surveying services, 45 Northway and 220, 230 Joan Corwin Way. We discussed that earlier in executive session. We have the authorization to approve the change order number 1 for the Millwood Sidewalk Improvement Project to Tectonic Engineering. We have a resolution authorizing acceptance of the stormwater agreement and performance bond for the Mount Kisco Country Club for their seasonal tennis dome. We have the authorization to purchase 3 salt spreaders for DPW to be installed on 1 new truck that we have and 2 that are soon to be arriving. We have the authorization to solicit bids for the sidewalk snow removal for the Chappaqua Hamlet Parking District. We had a vendor for the first 2 years. We're hoping they'll bid again. We were happy with their service. We have the authorization to correct the final payment amount to D&M Electrical Contracting. Unfortunately, when we approved that a couple weeks ago, there was a discrepancy of about $7. There's the authorization to purchase the joint and crack filler and sealer services for our roadways. Authorization to purchase cured in place spot liners. That's for our, we had a couple of stormwater mains that needed renovation. We have the authorization to obtain bids for the 2022 summer camp season transportation. And the authorization to approve a block party request on Whitlaw Lane, Whitlaw Close. Let's see, a couple more. Authorization to approve Triad service contract renewal for the police. They help us navigate the 207C cases when we have an officer injured on the job. We have the authorization to renew a couple of their software agreements. Power DMS, and I think Impact was the other one. We have the authorization to issue a plumbing permit refund for 100 King Street, and the authorization to approve Kimley Horn's change order number 5.
Thank you, Rob.
Can you remind me what that one was?
Change order number 5 was the latest change order that they've been working on right now. I think we tabled that. Jill, can you help? I think that was discussed earlier in the summer, and
The work has been done already. It's the, Sabrina, it was the one that was
Jill,
for
I can't hear you.
80%.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. It's for the 80% AMI and 100% AMI studies?
Yeah, it
We
was
didn't
for
approve
the,
that already?
No,
the
it wasn't
contract
approved.
never signed.
Yeah. The resolution wasn't approved, yeah. We gave them authorization, and so they proceeded. You already have their work, but you never got the approval of the board.
All right,
The formal
so,
approval of the board.
so we're all set with a work session. We can move to adjourn someone to then enter our town board meeting.
Yes.
I move to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Move to open the town board meeting.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Jill, any announcements or anything, administrative report? No, nothing now. I'll also hold my supervisor's report for writing.
Okay, I actually just have one thing, and that is that our development department is going to be closed to the public until after Labor Day.
Jill, we're having a hard time
Can't hear
hearing
you.
you. We're having a hard time hearing you, Jill.
Sabrina, Rob, you want to
Yeah,
just announce
I
it?
can.
Yeah.
I can speak to that. So, due to COVID, unfortunately, we had a case in our development department. We're going to leave the office the office will remain closed until Tuesday following Labor Day. They are all working remotely. You can contact all of them via email. They're still working, but until we get the negative tests back and a couple have to quarantine, we're going to leave the office closed until, I believe it's September 7th.
So it's physically closed but open for business.
Correct.
All right.
Yes, we
Then
are
I have
still,
no supervisor's report to share today at this point. Public comment, anyone? Bueller, no? Okay. Public hearing we're rolling into now, for landmark designation of 586 King Street.
I need to change my seat.
What's that?
I need to move.
good night, folks.
Good night, thank you,
Good night,
Sabrina.
Sabrina.
Thank you, thank you.
So does she recuse herself on this?
You have to
or-
recuse.
She is.
From what?
Yeah,
Oh.
this is her house.
Oh, it's your house. You should probably just, should you just leave the whole, okay. All right, so, open a public hearing?
I move to open the public hearing on the landmark designation of 586 Kane Street.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So I think we were expecting Gray Williams this evening, and he does not appear to be here.
So, should we just adjourn this for our next next town board meeting?
Yes.
Joe, do we just,
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
okay. Somebody want to go ahead and do that then?
I move to adjourn this public meeting to September 14th, 2021.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Welcome back.
All right.
Okay, are we rolling into the consent agenda items? Resolutions?
All right, I move to approve the consent agenda as submitted, consisting of authorization to hire 2 part-time recreation attendants recreation, authorization to approve change in pay rate recreation, authorization to appoint in the ARB, authorization to renew property casualty umbrella insurance with Zurich, authorization to issue refunds Camp 2021, resolution authorizing the settlement of J. Emma versus the town of Newcastle, resolution accepting maintenance bonds for 230 Campfire Road, resolution accepting cash bonds agreement to 91 Bedford Road, resolution accepting maintenance bond for stormwater management, tree preservation, and wetlands buffer maintenance for Chappaqua Crossing Retail, resolution accepting maintenance bonds for Route 117 right-of-way tree removal and remediation of stormwater impacts associated with construction of T intersection for Chappaqua Crossing Retail, authorization to provide fire hydrant to Chappaqua Crossing, authorization to award contract for land surveying services 45 Northway, authorization to award contract for land surveying services 220 to 230 Joan Corwin Way, authorization to approve change order number 1 for Millwood Sidewalk Improvement Project, Tectonic Engineering. Resolution authorizing acceptance of stormwater agreement and performance bond, Mount Kisco Country Club. Authorization to purchase 3 salt spreaders, DPW. Authorization to solicit bids for sidewalk snow removal for the Chappaqua Hamlet District, Parking District. Authorization to correct final payment amount to D&M Electrical Contracting Inc., Inningwood Pump Station Generator Installation. Authorization to purchase joint and crack filler sealer services. Authorization to purchase cured-in spot liners. Authorization to obtain bids for 2022 camp season transportation recreation. Authorization to approve block party requests. Whitlaw Lane Close. Authorization to approve Triad Service Contract Renewal Police. Authorization to renew annual software maintenance agreement police. Authorization to renew Power DMS Annual Maintenance Service Agreement Police. Authorization to issue plumbing permit refund 100 King Street. Authorization to approve Kimley Horn change order number 5. Authorization to obtain land surveying services for Douglas Road sidewalks.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Go ahead, Lori.
Okay. I move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $378,043.81 listed on the summary pre-check writing report and detail voucher detail report, both dated August 26, 2021. Checks will be issued and mailed to each claimant listed on Tuesday, August 31st, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move to authorize the promotion of Police Officer Christopher Rollison to the position of Police Sergeant within the Newcastle Police Department at the annual salary of $131,641, effective August 31st, 2021.
Second, and congratulations.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Congratulations, Sergeant Rollison.
Rollison.
I move to authorize the promotion of Police Officer Paolo Caparelli to the position of Police Sergeant within the Newcastle Police Department at the annual salary of $131,641, effective September 1st, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, Sergeant Caparelli. Lisa, you want to do the next one, the next two?
Sure. I move to authorize the promotion of Police Officer Keith Scarrett to the position of Police Sergeant within the Newcastle Police Department at the annual salary of $131,641, effective September 2nd, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Congratulations,
Congratulations.
Sergeant Scarrett.
And I move to approve the following non-union salary adjustments effective June 1st, 2021. Patricia Antonucci, $92,037. Lauren Cascone, $76,500. Thomas Costello, $145,350. Sabrina Charlie Hull, $155,000. Robert Cioli, $138,281. Robert Deary, $165,000. Julia Golden, $84,200. Josh Herman, $147,900. And Tiffany White, $71,400.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do the payment of claims? Did we do the payment of
did
claims?
that.
Yeah.
We did? Okay.
I did that.
Yeah?
There was someone who missed public comment that has their hand raised.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, can you just introduce yourself?
Well, good evening. My name is Bruce Goldberg, 90 Hilltop Drive, Chappaqua. I'm a newcomer to the area. I have 2 elementary age children who start school on Wednesday. I sent out an email last evening to address my concerns about what could potentially be a super spread event in these schools, most notably elementary schools where the children are unvaccinated. I made public comment August 11th before the school board. Didn't get much relief. Did get some self-help today and was encouraged that 2 of my children's teachers have been vaccinated. I asked them directly. So I'm asking, we didn't get any direction from the Department of Health. Commissioner failed to direct a health emergency. The newly appointed governor passing the buck to the local executive branch, which falls on Supervisor Saland. email last night and who I requested to declare a state of emergency under the executive law. We don't know who in these school buildings are vaccinated, who could potentially be a super spreader. So I'm asking you, Mr. Supervisor, whether you in fact declare a state of emergency under the executive law, Article 2B, and certainly Section 24, find out who is entering my children's school buildings.
All right, my relatively brief response is I'm not, there's no emergency order at this time. We've discussed a new mask mandate, a new mask law, which we're workshopping now. I completely recognize and understand the importance of vaccination, and certainly I hope that the school district and the Board of Education is doing the right thing, and I'm confident they are concerned, and I'm confident they are going to do the right thing if they haven't done so already, because they're certainly care about the children and responsible for them. So I have the utmost confidence that they're going to do what is appropriate. I will also add, as you may not be aware, I take this seriously. My young 8-year-old son volunteered and on his own. We didn't push him or force him after we gave him the option to test as a potential under 12-year-old vaccination, and we've had him do that. My wife is a physician who wears PPE and the N95 every day. She's in the office and seeing patients. So I appreciate and respect what you're saying, but we're workshopping something right now. And if it comes to the point we need to have an executive order along those lines, I'll discuss with council and my colleagues to do so.
Just to clarify with Ed, the town board would not have the authority to enact a vaccination requirement upon the school district employees.
We haven't looked at that, but that is my understanding.
Sorry, that was a question mark at the end of that.
Yeah, we haven't looked, even last year, the town board didn't try to legislate what was going to happen in the Chappaqua Central School
Right.
District, and I think that's where we are today.
Yeah, and certainly we can look at it, and not to put any Board of Education person on the spot, but I'm overwhelmingly confident whether issues we have during a campaign that she's trying to do the right thing and will do the right thing. And there's 2 of them. So we have them here, but I will not put them on the spot. Well, one former, pardon, I apologize, I should have said that. And one current. So they're tasked with keeping our children safe. I'm sure they're doing their best, 100%.
And Mr. Goldberg, we will certainly make sure to bring your comment to the school board and to the superintendent of schools to the extent that they don't know about it already, but.
Yeah. Well, there's also an email.
School board member, there's one sitting in our audience right now, you probably can't see her, but she now is aware, but I will certainly pass it on to them as well.
It was an email chain, they were already added to it.
I will call them.
Well, I mean, they indicated they don't have the authority to do that, and I'm saying the governor, through her comments within the last several days, says it's up to the locals to administer their district and town, and it's up to them. I mean, the country is divided, the states are divided, and it's up to the local executive. The Board of Ed's certainly not going to do it. I'm not sure if it's a union issue, but if the unions are behind vaccination mandates, at the least supply staff, employees of these schools with KN95 and N95 masks. If we want to do everything humanly possible to keep them safe, scientists say N95, KN95s is the way to go. Let's do it.
I understand that. We will discuss it internally here, and I'm sure the school board will continue doing the same.
I appreciate you hearing me out. Thanks very
Mr.
much, and I appreciate the efforts of the town board. It's a difficult job.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so
Have a good
much.
night. Are we ready to move to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
I want to hold out this time. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.